It's 6 o'clock Central African time. A very good morning to you. And it's time to rise and shine here on Channel Africa. You tuned in as we bring you the African perspective. My name is Asanda, Beda. We're broadcasting from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thanks, Jabu, for driving us with that great news. We loved the last jam, actually.
I loved it.
It's the first time I was hearing it.
It's so cool, man. It's the kind of a mix of old school and new school. So
yeah, and there's a bit of Tswana thrown in there. I think when you are being biased.
A very good morning to you. My name is Ndoro. And why am I dancing? Well, because it's a Friday, Asanda.
Yes.
And I get very excited at the weekend.
Really?
Fridays are my favorite days of the week.
And a long weekend at
that. It's true. It's true. But we've got a busy show today. What do we have in store? Well, quite a bit. World Immunization Day. We've got Cyril Ramaphosa talking to Volodymyr Zelensky. We've got market updates, nature challenges, immunization week, you name it, we've got it. But what's in the news this hour?
We're going to find out from Onele Nzinzi as we cross over to her and say good morning. And also after her is Sports Headlines with Musibudi Makura.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda, and a very good morning to our listeners. Officials in Somalia say 40 militants have been killed as Al-Shabaab fighters have battled Somali troops and allied forces for control of a strategic army base in central Somalia. This comes as the Al-Qaeda-linked militants try to extend recent gains in the region. Capturing the base in Wagadi town in the Middle Shabelle region, which houses soldiers, special forces and clan fighters, would enable Al-Shabaab to sever an important trunk road between the capital Mogadishu and Galmudug state. Some political parties in South Africa have poured cold water on the Democratic Alliance Party's session. It was victorious in securing the removal of the 0.5 percentage point VAT increase. Several political parties held a joint media briefing on their discussions to resolve the fiscal framework in central Johannesburg. The parties claim that the DA was outside of the discussion process. PA Deputy President Kenny Kunene says the DA had ulterior motives.
So the DA was going to vote for VAT increase had the ANC and the GNU parties agreed to be extorted by them. So when the extortionists could not get their way, they ran to the courts. So the DA has no moral authority to claim victory for the removal of the VAT increase.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and US President Donald Trump have agreed to meet soon to discuss relations between the two countries. Tensions have been high between the two countries after Trump accused the South African government of allowing attacks against the Afrikaner farming communities. Ramaphosa confirmed the two heads of state had a telephonic conversation with a big focus on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict and efforts towards peace. Ramaphosa was speaking from the Union buildings in Pretoria during a working visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I had an opportunity to speak to President Trump yesterday, or this morning rather, to discuss the peace process in Ukraine. We both agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction. President Trump and I also agreed to meet soon to address the various other matters regarding our relations between South Africa and the United States. We both spoke about the need to foster good relations between our two countries.
The Appeals Chamber of the International Criminal Court has upheld an appeal by Israel challenging the jurisdiction of the court in relation to its investigation into alleged war crimes in Gaza. The Appeals Chamber ruled that the pretrial chamber committed an error in law by failing to address Israel's argument that it was entitled to making a jurisdictional challenge under pertinent articles of the Rome Statute. Sean Bryce Peace reports.
The appeals chamber reversed the pre-trial chamber's decision and remanded the matter back to the lower chamber for a new ruling on the substance of Israel's challenge to the jurisdiction of the court. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan in November last year issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for alleged war crimes in Gaza. Israel's challenge to the ICC's jurisdiction hinges on its arguments that it is not a party to the Rome Statute and that Palestine is not a fully fledged state, and that the ICC therefore cannot exercise jurisdiction over matters related to the conflict in Gaza. The pre-trial chamber earlier ruled that the court's territorial jurisdiction extended to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Sherwin Brycepease, SABC News, New York.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, it's down to the second legs of the CAF Champions League with Al Ahly hosting Mamelodi Sundowns, as well as Pyramids FC taking on Orlando Pirates, while Carlos Alcaraz withdraws from the Madrid Open due to injury. I have details of these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
It's 7 minutes past 6 Central Africa time, and every morning after the 6 o'clock news, we bring you a concise roundup of the top stories from across the continent that played out in the past 24 hours. And this is just to keep you up to date. And our team of reporters, analysts and experts provide a context to help us all stay informed. And we kick things off with this story. The Democratic Republic of Congo and M23 rebels on Wednesday pledged in statements released after talks in Qatar to work towards peace after violence flared up in January, raising fears of a wider regional war.
The statement said the parties reaffirmed their commitment to an immediate cessation of hostilities and described the talks as frank and constructive. However, sources in the two delegations expressed their frustration over the pace of negotiations, and it was unclear when or if another round would take place. Sources from both sides of the talk said potential confidence-building measures, such as the release of Congo-held prisoners with links to Rwanda or M23, had inflamed tensions and nearly derailed the outcome. A Congo government source said that M23 was asking for too much. A source from the rebel coalition that includes the M23 said the parties had left Doha when disagreements over the confidence-building measures became an insurmountable obstacle to substantive talks.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to cut short his trip to South Africa on Thursday to return to Kiev following a Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian capital. Zelensky immediately traveled back to Ukraine after meeting South African President Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria.
I don't see strong pressure on Russia, nor new sanctions packages against the aggression of the Russian Federation. So far, we are very hopeful, without reproaches, without any emotions and reproaches. We are speaking very directly. We believe that with greater pressure on the Russian Federation, we will be able to bring our sides closer, if you like.
I had an opportunity to speak to President Trump yesterday to discuss the peace process in Ukraine. We both agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction.
Ivory Coast opposition leader Tidjane Thiam has vowed to continue his bid for the presidency in the upcoming October elections, this despite being struck off the electoral roll.
An Ivory Coast court made the ruling on Tuesday, saying the 62-year-old was a French national when he registered. The decision, which cannot be appealed, could end the Ivorian-born Thiam's ambition to run in the presidential election due in October. Speaking to Reuters in Paris, Thiam said his party PDCI would not put up an alternative candidate. Instead, they plan to use their political weight nationally and internationally so that, quote, reason prevailed.
It's not for the government to decide who runs opposition parties or who gets to run against them, and that's what we're trying to do. And I really want the same criteria and demands to be put on Africa as any other part of the world. I don't accept the shrugging and saying this is Africa.
Ivory Coast opposition leader Tijane Thiam said he would fight on to run in the West African nation's presidential election due in October. This despite having been removed from the electoral roll.
All right, we've just done that story, but let's go to East Africa now, where Uganda says that it's shutting down more than half of its embassies around the world to save money. The Kampala government plans to reduce its foreign missions to just 15 from 38.
Uganda's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has confirmed a sweeping plan to close 23 foreign missions, part of a cost-cutting directive from the president. Parliament was told the ministry faces a budget shortfall of around $62 million US. Security concerns have also weighed heavily on this decision. The recent attacks on Uganda's embassy in Kinshasa exposed serious risks, with many missions relying on private security firms instead of official state protection. Yet some embassies remain critical. Those in the Middle East are overwhelmed with requests for consular services from a large population of Ugandan migrant workers.
And that's how we end the segment of Africa Roundup on this Friday. It's the 25th of April.
Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Right, it's time for us to take a look at what's been happening on the North African region in particular, but in Africa in general, to give us a sense of some of the news events that have been making headlines. And to help us unpack all of that, when I joined on the line by a journalist who has a particular focus in that region, Elysia Volkman. Elysia, thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
All right, so Egypt has had an interesting role in the situation in Gaza versus Israel. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this proposal that they have about a 5-year truce deal between Israel and Hamas.
Israel, of course, Egypt is Israel's direct neighbour, but Egypt sort of occupies a sort of unusual space in that its main trading partner is actually the United States, and its main donor is the United States. So it sits between the Middle East and the US. The situation in Gaza has been putting a lot of pressure on Egypt, in that there have been so many, with the absolutely devastating sort of carpet bombing of Gaza. You've had more and more people trying to escape that and moving into Egypt, but up till now they've not really been very proactive. You know, people have been stuck on the border for a long time, and so this is quite an unprecedented step that Egypt is taking to actually kind of move in and take a more active role in the negotiations.
Is it something that they can win at? Because my understanding has been that Gazans haven't always trusted Egypt in its dealings.
Well, for precisely the reasons that I've mentioned, because they're not seen as a sort of an undiluted, pure Arabic ally of the Palestinians. Because of the support by the US, I think within the popular opinion, I think ordinary Egyptians very much support the Palestinian cause. And you find this across the region, that the governments and the regimes will take one position, but in terms of the hearts and minds of Arabic people, the struggle of Palestinians is something that is very close and dear to their hearts. I mean, there have recently been public demonstrations in Tunisia by students. It's something that they grew up with, but the government's opinions and sort of standing has always been very different. And the reason that I think the US has wanted Egypt to take over from Qatar is because Qatar is seen as being the direct ally of Hamas, because Hamas is based in Doha, and they're seen, as part of the sort of axis that's controlled by Iran. So this is a kind of a shift away from there being negotiations with what are seen as the direct allies of Hamas and Iran. But how successful it is, I mean, we've seen, Trump has had a lot of hubris when it comes to sorting out wars and doing deals, and time and time again he fails. He reads the room wrong. He has not really done the amount of sort of in-depth study or just listening to briefings by experts, ambassadors and diplomatic teams who have been based in those countries, who understand the not just the political but also the interpersonal dynamics between leaders. So I fear particularly with Sisi is somebody who is known as being an authoritarian rather than a great diplomat. That Egypt may struggle, particularly as they are dealing with two sets of leadership that are very hard-headed and very ideologically led. You have Benjamin Netanyahu and this sort of extreme right-wing Zionist coalition that sort of take Zionism to a whole different level than people had previously envisioned. And then you have Hamas, who are sort of backed against the wall, who are also increasingly unpopular in Palestine themselves. So they're two parties that are very much sort of entrenched and in a corner. And that's often a very difficult place to negotiate a peace treaty with.
All right, you mentioned Tunisia. A couple of stories there that have come to my attention for sure. I saw some very disturbing footage on social media yesterday. This crackdown on migrant camps there. It looks like Tunisian authorities are evacuating a camp, approximately 3,000 sub-Saharan African migrants. They say that it's addressing public health and safety concerns. One can't help but think, though, that there might be a little bit more to this than that.
There is. I mean, the situation in the migrant camps. So these are informal camps that have been set up since sort of the spring of 2023, after Kais Saied gave his now very infamous Great Replacement speech, where he said, well, he stole a theory from the Nationalist Party that there was an international criminal conspiracy to change the demographic of Tunisia from an Arabic culture to an African one, meaning a black African one. And since then, there has been nothing but chaos and real persecution of black migrants in Tunisia. to make no bones about it. So there have been these sort of clearances of these camps. These are because these villages of Al Amra and Jabanyana were previously places that people would pass through to get the smugglers' boats to go to Italy. But since the sort of assertion by the European Union, and particularly Italy, that Tunisia should manage the maritime frontier, that they should extend the search and rescue zone to be controlled by Tunisian Coast Guard, that people have basically sort of, it's become a bottleneck, and that you have thousands, I think over 20,000 people who have created encampments like shanty towns on farming land, which are olive groves. So they will refer to them as the zitoun, which is the Arabic word for olive. Now the local community split. There's a lot of the local community that are very sympathetic, that have been very supportive, that have given water, but there is also the other side that have been protesting and calling for something to be done about it. But the issue of public health and safety, I mean, the people most at risk are the migrants. They're constantly being attacked by gangs with machetes and even shot. There were 2 men who were shot recently, and I follow sort of what's happening, and you regularly see really horrific images of people with machete wounds, their heads cut open, things that normally would go to A&E, to a plastic surgeon, and they have amongst, I think also there's this image that all migrants are a bunch of uneducated scroungers. It simply isn't true. You've got within that community a lot of medical professionals, so doctors, a lot of nurses, public healthcare people, and they've been setting up clinics. Now, one MP went down to the Zitoun camps and filmed, because people are sort of set in, so they're trying to make life as comfortable as possible. So they bought power generators so that they could have light at night. They built these clinics, these sort of hospitals out of kind of wooden structures with plastic. So they've got little wards, they've even got sort of, makeshift operating theories. I mean, early yesterday morning, amidst all this chaos, the medical team delivered the 100th baby within the camps. So that the government are sort of trying to sort of disrupt and make things as uncomfortable as possible for migrant people, though in reality the figures are not that big. They're estimated between 23,000 to 27,000, which doesn't really vary from 2023. It's not a huge amount, but it's become a real political football, because the country itself is struggling. You have an authoritarian leader who was elected on a ticket of solving corruption and making people's lives better, but for the ordinary Tunisian, things have not got better. The cost of living is excruciatingly hard.
Talking about that leader, I mean, this lawyer Ahmed Souab has been arrested, ostensibly really more about him defending critics of Kais Saied. How is he able to remain, I don't want to use the word popular, but I guess that's what it is, when his behavior is very much like Ben Ali of the past?
Well, I think his popularity is beginning to wane. That's really why we're seeing these increased crackdowns. So there were 37 last Friday, 37 sort of people who were cast as his political opponents and critics were given an array of incredibly harsh sentences, between 4 and 66 years. They come from a spectrum, across the political range, from the sort of more central left-wing parties to even actually quite right wing, the PDL party, Abiy Musi, and those getting the harshest sentence are from Ennahda, which is the Muslim Democratic Party that had the most seats in Parliament. And I think it's being seen as another bit of political theatre, because he was first elected in 2019. He was re-elected last year, and people are thinking, well, what are you really doing? You're making a big show of punishing the people you don't like. But what we've also seen is he does these sort of walkabouts to show that he's a man of the people and talk to the people, but the people are not happy. To the extent that a couple of men have actually stood up to him, and one man said, please help us, we're hungry. And the president said, "Oh, don't say that you're hungry." And the guy actually said, "You're a failed president." And we haven't heard what's happened to him. And another chap said, "Help us, we're really suffering." And the president said to him, "I'm suffering too, and so are my neighbours." And people are thinking, have you got all your chairs at home? It's not just that he's not providing the services and kind of economic reforms and sort of boost to the economy that they had hoped for. He's now beginning to say very bizarre things. And there's actually a sentiment sort of shift away from him towards supporting Ennahda, who are the very people that they detested and hated beforehand. And people are seeing things in a very different light and beginning to understand that a lot of the problems that they had before Said's power grab are just part and parcel of the lumps and bumps of a democratic transition away from a full gas autocratic system of Zine Abidine Ben Ali to the trials and tribulations that you do have in a democracy. So it's not really it's not really a happy picture in Tunisia at the moment.
There's one country that's been on the radar for me as well, and I'm just wondering where we are. I remember when Muammar Gaddafi was toppled, and there was this hope for a new era, a new dispensation, and really there's been instability ever since, and the East versus the West. What's your take on where Libya is right now? I mean, I'm reading things like education minister being sentenced to prison over a textbook shortage. What on earth is going on?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think if you talk to people who are far more expert than I about Libya, I mean, my friend of mine he was in Tripoli, and he's somebody. He set up the Libya Herald. He is a. If anybody can be called an expert on Libya, it's him. And he said, "I'm just trying to work out what is going on." I think the problem with Libya is that it fractured so much. I mean, one of the big mistakes of the revolution was after the militias had risen up and gotten rid of Gaddafi. There's a lot of feeling, from Libyan friends who said they should have said, "Thank you so much for your service. Right, now go home." Instead, they put people from all the different militias, so you're talking about different families, different tribe affiliations and groups, and they put them on a state salary. Libya's money primarily comes from its oil wealth, so there has been just an unending conflict about who controls the oil wealth, but also more and more the new mineral wealth that has been discovered there. It's very plentiful, and there was even a war over the gold fields, the border with Chad. So economically, even despite having this, huge natural resources, if something isn't sort of unified and administrated properly, then it just all fractures. People are having real problems just with cash flow. There's no confidence in banks. There's a big problem with the central bank. I mean, earlier the the head of the central bank was, was even, or it was a technical lead who's kidnapped. All sorts of crazy things happening because nobody is really taking the real responsibility of government. It's all petty sort of familial group politics. It's a whole mosaic of the different groups, and you're seeing there's just a constant fracturing and splintering, and different armed groups trying to sort of cling on to sources of power, government trying to assert control over things such as the Ras Shadid border with Tunisia, which is controlled by the Zuwara, the Amazigh tribes families. That's their main income, particularly smuggling out cheap petrol. And central government was trying to control that, and it's just not worked.
Yeah,
there's just no there's no collective will to create, if not a democracy, some kind of functioning political system that governs and organises. And this is the difference.
I'm going to have to cut us, unfortunately. I mean, that question on its own is probably a PhD thesis.
or three.
Exactly.
It's huge. It's huge. But it's very sad because it's a beautiful country.
Yeah. Thanks so much indeed for your insights and what's happening in that part of the world. Thanks so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
It's Alicia Volkman, who's a journalist in the northern part of the continent, watching events there. And that's where we'll leave our North Africa roundup for this week. Right, it's time for your news headlines. Here's Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Officials in Somalia say 40 militants have been killed as Al-Shabaab fighters have battled Somali troops and allied forces for control of a strategic army base in central Somalia. This comes as the Al-Qaeda-linked militants try to extend recent gains in the region. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and US President Donald Trump have agreed to meet soon to discuss relations between the two countries. Tensions have been high between the two countries after Trump accused the South African government of allowing attacks against Afrikaner farming communities. And mourners continue to queue to pay their last respect to Pope Francis, who's lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica yesterday. The demand was so high that the Vatican kept the church open almost all night. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
All right, let's find out about Mamelodi Sundowns and Orlando Pirates in action. And here's sports, and Musubudi Makura will give us details.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you so much, Asanda. Very good morning from the sports desk. You are indeed right. Mamelodi Sundowns as well as Orlando Pirates in action today in the second leg semi-finals of the CAF Champions League. So a big night for South African football. Pyramids FC and Orlando Pirates are poised to make a make or break showdown tonight in Cairo, Egypt, with a coveted spot in the Total Energies CAF Champions League final up for stake after a tightly contested goalless draw in the first leg at the FNB Stadium just last weekend. The tie remains balanced heading into the second leg at the Cairo International Stadium. Both sides will now need to dig deep to break the deadlock and also book their ticket to the final. The Egyptian outfit will look to continue their imperious home form. So Pyramids have won all 4 of the CAF Champions League home fixtures this season, racking up 17 goals and conceding just 3. They also boast an incredible 22-match unbeaten run at home 2 in all competitions this season, a record that could prove crucial in such a high-pressured encounter against the South African side and former champions Orlando Pirates. Meanwhile, former Bafana captain Lucas Radebe believes both Pirates as well as Mamelodi Sundowns will win the second legs of the CAF Champions League semi-final leg today in Egypt and reach the final of Africa's elite club football competition. Radebe, who played football at the highest level and was captain of English Premiership side Leeds United, says both teams have a better chance of winning in Cairo against Al Ahly as well as Pyramids FC. So the football legend says keeping a clean sheet in the first legs of their semi-final ties gives two South African clubs an advantage in these second legs. He also added that Egyptian clubs in this case will be under pressure while playing at home, while a single goal for the South African clubs could make a difference for them tonight.
I think for me they stand a good chance, of getting to the final because of the pressure that the other teams has, and if they can use that and the players believing in themselves, because they've got nothing to lose. They've achieved well to get to thus far and to take those both teams to Egypt. With a clean sheet. As long as they know themselves, they believe in themselves, surely they will come back, victorious.
Right, so the process of introducing video assistant referee VAR in South Africa is moving quickly following the availability of funding to implement the project from the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Gayton McKenzie. SAFA CEO Lydia Munyabao has confirmed to SABC Sport that following the closing of a tender about 2 days ago, the next step now is to appoint a tender committee which will go through the approved VAR suppliers who have applied in this process. SAFA, by the way, put out the tender on the 9th of this month.
The request for proposals went out and we are looking obviously for approved VAR suppliers out there to put in the proposals in line with the requirements that we put forward. We are in the process of putting together a tender committee that will assess all the proposals that we receive, so that we identify the best possible service providers that we can interview and ensure that whoever is eventually appointed is the right service provider for this.
On to tennis news now. Carlos Alcaraz has pulled out of his home tournament at the Madrid Open due to a right leg injury. Now, Alcaraz told the press in Madrid on Thursday that he had been forced to withdraw, as he also revealed that he has been struggling with a left hamstring issue. The Spaniard required treatment on his right groin during his Barcelona Open final defeat to Jorge Rune just last week and subsequently underwent MRI tests. Now, those tests have since revealed a problem with his right leg abductor, which has forced the four-time Grand Slam champion to now withdraw from the ATP 1000 Masters event. Alcaraz won the Monte Carlo Masters earlier on this month before continuing his winning streak at the Barcelona Open to reach the final against Rune, but the 21-year-old experienced discomfort during a 7-6, 6-2 defeat and then decided against attempting to win a third Madrid title following victories on clay in 2022 and in 2023. Meanwhile, Iga Swiatek avoided another shock defeat against Filipino teenager Alexander Illa by fighting back to win their Madrid Open second round match. World number 2, Swiatek, who is stunned, or rather was stunned by Illa in Miami just last month, won their tie 4-6, 6-4 and 6-2 on the Spanish clay. A sticky start appeared to justify some pre-match talk that Swiatek might have issues dealing with her teenage opponent. Now, Swiatek lost in the Stuttgart quarterfinals just last week, having received a bye in the Madrid first round, produced some edgy ground strokes in a poor first set. A tally of 25 unforced errors indicated it was a performance nowhere near befitting of a WTA Tour's dominant clay court player of recent seasons. That's a wrap from the sports desk at this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, simply send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. Back with more sporting updates in the next hour. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu Di Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
And it's time now for us to find out for the first time what's been happening in the world of business and economics as we say good morning to Eva Chipa.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks and good morning to you too, Peter. The Good Party leader in South Africa, Patricia de Lille, has criticised the Democratic Alliance for misleading the public by claiming victory for the reversal of the 0.5% value-added tax increase. This follows an announcement by the Finance Ministry that the 0.5 percentage point VAT increase would be rescinded. On Tuesday, both the DA and the Economic Freedom Fighters went to court in a bid to have the fiscal framework on VAT set aside. De Lille says the credit must go to parties that participated in the intense discussions.
Some misguided reporter this morning said that South Africa must thank the Blue Party for going to court and stopping that. We must get the independence of the Fourth Estate to be respected. Certainly people are entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. Because the fact is, what we are witnessing here today is a budget victory through principled negotiations and political maturity. And so we must make an appeal that we keep that balance because the truth will always survive.
De Lille also cautioned the DA to refrain from discrediting the government's performance.
Even in terms of the performance of the government of national unity, we see reports as if some of these things by achievement by some of these ministers is new, when in fact, go and check the facts, you will see that ministers before that started these processes. And it was not just because some new minister come in from the GNU. The lies must stop.
Traders say Kenya's shilling has lost some ground against the dollar amid a muted foreign exchange appetite after bouncing high on Thursday as offshore investors sought domestic bonds. Commercial banks quoted the shilling at 129.10 to 129.60 per dollar, compared with Wednesday's closing rate of 128.90 to 129.40. In neighbouring Uganda, the shilling has held its levels against the dollar, supported by hard currency inflows amid agencies. Atlantic Lithium is continuing negotiations with Ghana's government to salvage its Ewoya lithium project. The negotiations come as falling prices of the critical battery metal cast a shadow on viability of the West African nation's maiden lithium mine. The Australia-based miner is seeking concessions on Ghana's new mining revenue framework, which includes a 10% free carried interest for the state and a special 13% royalty on gross revenue from lithium production. Africa's lead gold producer, Ghana, granted the Australian miner a 15-year lease to establish the mine by late 2024, hoping to capitalise on the EV boom. And lastly, the British Finance Minister, Rachel Reeves, says she was confident that Britain and the US could reach a trade deal to reduce the hit from President Donald Trump's import tariffs. Reeves says Britain was not in a rush to secure a deal, and she ruled out making concessions on food standards in the talks. Reeves has, however, stressed that she stands with Trump and his administration on their worries about China's trade policies. Taking a first look at your financial indicators for this morning. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 610. In Botswana, it's 13 pula 58. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 59. And in Zambia, it's 28 kwacha 26. To the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 real 69. In Russia, 83 rubles 09. In India, 85 rupees 36. In China, 7 yuan 29. And in South Africa, it's 18 rand 70 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,348, platinum at $968 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is at $66.81 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2 711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business News, good morning. I'm Eva Chipa.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Right, it's 6:46 Central African time, and every morning at this time, what do we try and do? We try and give you a G20 fact of the day. Now, the G20 South Africa Summit will be the 20th meeting of the Group of 20, or G20, a meeting of heads of state and government, and it'll be the first G20 summit held on African soil. Now, there are high expectations that South Africa will lead a progressive, people-centered presidency in a fractured global geopolitical context until it hands over the presidency to the United States on the 1st of December 2025. And that is our G20 fact for the morning.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
So I think we had a shout out on Twitter, and I now closed my phone and I can't find that. But thanks so much for tuning in terms of letting us know how you feel about our programming. And you can do send your views and your shout outs, whatever it is that you prefer to do, at Channel Africa 1 is our handle there on X. We are also on Instagram on that same handle at Channel Africa 1, and TikTok as well. And then we are on Facebook as Channel Africa. There you go. My phone just froze. I'll find that listener. Thank you so much. All right, let's talk now the G20 SA and South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, who has raised concerns about deepening vulnerabilities in emerging markets and across the African continent, calling it a pressing challenge. He made the remarks while attending the second G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting in Washington, D.C. Key topics on the agenda included the replenishment of the African Development Fund, the high cost of capital for African nations, and ongoing reforms to the international financial architecture, including the role of multilateral development banks. Channel Africa's business reporter Innocent Samosa has more.
The meeting forms part of South Africa's G20 presidency and brought together finance ministers and central bank governors from G20 member states, invited countries and international organizations. South Africa's Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago highlighted the key outcomes of the meeting.
We did reflect on the current economic developments and the extent of the uncertainty that engulfed the financial markets as a result of the trade measures that had been taken with respect to the impact on trade and the response in the form of tariffs and what that actually meant for financial stability. There was a reflection on the benefits from globalization, and members were supporting an open, rules-based and transparent trading system with the World Trade Organizations at its core. There was also a big reflection that the current rules would have to be relooked so that you have a much fairer trade.
The discussions focused on global economic challenges, financial stability and policies to support sustainable economic growth. Khanyago says the global financial market experienced heightened volatility but remained resilient.
There was also a very strong view that the global financial system and financial markets have witnessed heightened volatility but remained resilient, that the core of the global financial system remains resilient with adequate levels of capital and liquidity. Importantly, the regulatory reform agenda that we embarked on in the aftermath of the great financial crisis is bearing fruit and seems to have shielded the global financial system well, and that we must bid these reforms to continue to provide certainty with respect to that regulatory reform agenda.
It is believed that U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, participated in the discussions. However, South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana offered little detail regarding his contributions.
I mean, he was not largely contrary to what people expect him in contradicting anything that was saying, except was elaborating more on the rationale for what the Trump administration is doing on tariffs, the stuff that you probably know.
There was no official communique issued after the meeting. Minister Godongwana offered an explanation for the decision.
We took a conscious decision even before that if we don't issue a communique, the standard practice since Indonesia, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you will recall, there's been difficulty in the finance sector to issue a communique since then. But the standard practice we've established is that in the absence of a communique, we issue a chairman's statement. In this regard, we took a decision as the presidency that in this particular session, we're not going to issue a chairman's statement. We'll do that in July.
As global economic uncertainty continues to shape policy discussions, South Africa's active role in the G20 offers a crucial platform for championing Africa's financial needs and development priorities. However, some details of the talks remain under wraps. For Channel Africa News, I am Innocent Samosa in Johannesburg.
Zilipendwa na I am Henry Shekif.
Baiter, mambo vipi?
Poa.
Mwaka 2025 mpaka hivi sasa ukoje kwa upande wako mzee baba?
Kabisa, kwa sababu tumejiandaa vizuri. Kama mwaka jana tumefunga vizuri na Septemba, mwaka huu tumefungua vizuri na
hatari sana. Mzee umejipanga, utaki kutupumzisha?
Maana mwanzo walikuwa wanalalamika sana, you spend long time without releasing songs blah blah. Now I need to
back to back. Platform, mambo vipi?
Mambo poa kabisa, wanasemaje uko ese?
Yani huko kuna shangwe, yani la kufa mtu, sikwambie mtu babu.
Hii ni marangu ya kwanza pia kusikika kwa pande hizo za South Africa.
Karibu sana, unajisikiaje?
Wewe na furaha kubwa sana kwa sababu ni marangu ya kwanza, na I hope watu watakuwa wananisikiliza, watu wengi pia. Ili uweze kuvuka nje, watu waweze kukufahamu, tuseme West hivi na nchi tofauti, ni lazima pia uanze kufanya vizuri hapa nyumbani, then uvuke East Africa. After East Africa,
Zilipendwa hapa kwenye Channel Africa, taswira ya Afrika.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
At Chale Chipangura, they're all the way from Botswana on X, giving us a shout out, clapping hands for us and saying, my good people, I'm tuned in. Thank you so much for doing that, chalechipas.john. And talking of Botswana, we go there now with our next story. Botswana's Ministry of Child Welfare and Basic Education is currently reviewing its national curriculum to align with STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics learning. A high-level delegation from the ministry, led by Minister Kebuang Nono Khafella Mokoka, is in South Africa in an effort to engage and explore opportunities in the education system. The visit seeks to showcase South Africa's leading-edge implementation of coding and robotics across primary school classrooms and early childhood development or ECD programs. The minister elaborates.
We have had quite great relations with South Africa. We have shared bilateral relationships, and of course, we share quite a number of issues around basic education. And this time around, with our new ministry under the new government, which is now Child Welfare and Basic Education, we have also gone over some overview of the education system here. And we are aware now that the child welfare component, especially the ECD, has been moved to the basic education sector or ministry in South Africa. And we are here because we now are taking the route of STEAM education, where we now deal with students learning from a very tender age how to innovate, problem solve, and so forth. We want to produce these students who are able to solve problems, to learn skills, especially AI, technology, and so forth at a tender age, because we are now moving from our diamond-based economy or resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. And we are here basically to learn and appreciate the pedagogical orientation of the education system here, especially e-content, and how South African education system actually applies STEAM at ECD, pre-primary and primary levels, especially in the area of robotics and coding, and how South African education system actually deals with education with production. I've been listening to the MEC here for Gauteng, and he's talking about students taking some skill-based course, more like vocational skill at every grade, and that's the way we want to take. That is the multi-certification kind of approach that South Africa has, and I think Botswana calls it multiple pathways. And then we are also here to learn how teachers are being retooled so that we could go back home and find ways of retooling our teachers to actually get them towards STEAM education, and how assessment is done within the education system here. And of course, the relationship between STEAM and industry. And I think I learned a lot from MEC there. And then the location, most importantly, of sports in the curriculum, because in Botswana, we haven't had sports in schools for more than 6 years now. And of course, last but not least, the funding models for education.
And Minister, why was it so important for Botswana to review its national curriculum to align with STEAM learning?
We have inherited a colonial kind of education from our colonial masters, which hasn't actually served us in terms of having our graduates who fit well within the economy or within the market. So we are saying, instead of having graduates who do not possess much of skills that could actually help them grow and not rely on government for employment, we need to train them from a tender age to become, to produce something, so that at the end of the day, they don't just look for jobs, they can also set up their own industries, come up with new innovations, and actually employ others. Very, very self-reliant and quite productive citizens of the future.
Minister, you are currently at Science Bono. What has stood out for you there?
What a center. The hub of innovation, the hub of research, I actually jotted quite a number of things here that impressed me this morning. I just saw their video where they talk about smart classrooms and the interactive platforms that they have, the way they support science and math educators and programs, especially for disadvantaged communities. This is the hub of scientific innovation, the hub of interactive scientific models, which will go a long way in equipping South Africans from a tender age across all classes of society with innovative skills, with AI strategies and skills. For me, that's quite a plus for the country.
That was Botswana's Ministry of Child Welfare and Basic Education, Kibuang Kafela Mokoka. She was speaking to Channel Africa's Nhlanhla Mahlangu.
All right, it's 7 o'clock Central African time, isn't it? Which means this is the second hour of the program. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in to Rise and Shine right here on Channel Africa Radio, where we bring you the African perspective. And we are broadcasting live, and we are an internet radio station. www.channelafrica.co.za is where you can catch us. And we've got quite a lot lined up for you this hour, don't we, Asanda, Beda?
It seems like this week every day has been World Something Day. So it's World Immunization Day today.
Yeah.
We'll be taking a look at that in terms of how vaccination efforts have either progressed or slowed down on the continent and in the country. And then, of course, I think you had said this earlier in the first hour that we'll be looking at South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit here in South Africa, their meeting, and what happened in that or transpired in that. We'll have analysis on that, joined by a political analyst and foreign policy analyst. And then there'll obviously be more of those stories coming up in this hour. And good morning,
indeed.
everyone.
Yes, a very good morning to you all. Let's start with the news with Onele Nsinsi and sports headlines with Musibudi Makura.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Officials in Somalia say 40 militants have been killed as Al-Shabaab fighters have battled Somali troops and allied forces for control of a strategic army base in central Somalia. This comes as the Al-Qaeda-linked militants try to extend recent gains in the region. Capturing the base in Wagadi town in the Middle Shabelle region, which houses soldiers, special forces and clan fighters, would enable Al-Shabaab to sever an important trunk road between the capital Mogadishu and Galmudug state. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and US President Donald Trump have agreed to meet soon to discuss relations between the two countries. Tensions have been high between the two countries after Trump accused the South African government of allowing attacks against the Afrikaner farming communities. Ramaphosa confirmed that the two heads of states had a telephonic conversation with a big focus on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict and efforts towards peace. Ramaphosa was speaking from the Union buildings in Pretoria during a working visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I had an opportunity to speak to President Trump yesterday, or this morning rather, to discuss the peace process in Ukraine. We both agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction. President Trump and I also agreed to meet soon to address the various other matters regarding our relations between South Africa and the United States. We both spoke about the need to foster good relations between our two countries.
Some political parties in South Africa have poured cold water on the Democratic Alliance Party's assertion that it was victorious in securing the removal of the half percentage point VAT increase. Several political parties held a joint media briefing on their discussions to resolve the fiscal framework in Johannesburg. The parties claim that the DA was outside of the discussion process. PA Deputy President Kenny Kunene says the DA had ulterior motives.
So the DA was going to vote for VAT increase had the ANC and the GNU parties agreed to be extorted by them. So when the extortionists could not get their way, they ran to the courts. So the DA has no moral authority to claim victory for the removal of the VAT increase.
The appeals chamber of the International Criminal Court has upheld an appeal by Israel challenging the jurisdiction of the court in relation to its investigations into alleged war crimes in Gaza. The appeals chamber ruled that the pretrial chamber committed an error in law by failing to address Israel's argument that it was entitled to making a jurisdictional challenge under pertinent articles of the Rome Statute. Sharon Bryce Peace reports.
The appeals chamber reversed the pre-trial chamber's decision and remanded the matter back to the lower chamber for a new ruling on the substance of Israel's challenge to the jurisdiction of the court. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan in November last year issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister Yoav Gallant for alleged war crimes in Gaza. Israel's challenge to the ICC's jurisdiction hinges on its arguments that it is not a party to the Rome Statute and that Palestine is not a fully fledged state and that the ICC therefore cannot exercise jurisdiction over matters related to the conflict in Gaza. The pretrial chamber earlier ruled that the court's territorial jurisdiction extended to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Sherwin Brycepees, SABC News, New York.
Lastly, mourners continue to queue to pay their last respects to Pope Francis, who's lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. Yesterday, the demand was so high that the Vatican kept the church open almost all night. The BBC's Mark Lowen.
The Vatican says that some 50,000 people already went inside St. Peter's Basilica yesterday alone in order to file past the coffin of Pope Francis and to say their final farewells. He is lying in an open coffin there, dressed in his red robes, his white mitre headgear, holding rosary beads. And you can see just how long the queue is. It stretches all the way down that road there, Via della Conciliazione, onto St. Peter's Square, as people come from all over the world to pay their final farewells.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And in your sports news this hour, we look ahead to the second legs of the CAF Champions League, where Al Ahly will be hosting Mamelodi Sundowns, while Pyramids take on Orlando Pirates. Iga Swiatek fights back to beat teenager Alexander Ella in the Madrid Open. Details of these and other stories at 7:30.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Now, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has expressed deep concern over the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, condemning the loss of civilian lives, damage to critical infrastructure, and the worsening humanitarian crisis. Briefing the media on Thursday at the Union Buildings in Pretoria during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's working visit to South Africa, President Ramaphosa reiterated South Africa's stance that only viable path to peace is through diplomacy, inclusive dialogue, and adherence to the principles of the United Nations Charter, particularly the mandate for member states to resolve disputes peacefully. Channel Africa reporter Michael Mbewe has more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's working visit to South Africa appears to have boosted South Africa's global diplomatic stature at a time when its relations with the US have hit rock bottom. Zelensky's visit comes at a time where he is facing immense pressure from the US to sign a peace deal that includes Ukraine ceding off Crimea to Russia and stopping the ambition of becoming a member of NATO, an idea Zelensky is rejecting. Briefing the media, President Cyril Ramaphosa said he's saddened by the devastation of the war.
South Africa is deeply concerned about the continuing conflict in Ukraine, the continuing loss of civilian lives, the damage to critical infrastructure, and deteriorating humanitarian situation. South Africa believes that the only path to peace is through diplomacy, inclusive dialogue, and a commitment to the principles of the United Nations Charter. This includes the principle that all member states should settle their international disputes by peaceful means.
In a call for action, South Africa has emphasized its readiness to support credible and inclusive multilateral effort aimed at achieving a just and sustainable peace.
South Africa stands ready to continue to support all credible as well as inclusive multilateral efforts at achieving a just and sustainable comprehensive peace. And we call upon all parties, both Russia and Ukraine, to ensure that there is a comprehensive ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire, so that discussions and negotiations can start between the two countries.
He said President Zelensky has confirmed Ukraine's willingness to engage in discussions with Russia and is also prepared to implement a full ceasefire.
President Zelensky, as he himself will say, told me that as Ukraine, they are ready to engage in discussions and negotiations with Russia, and they are also ready to have a comprehensive, unconditional ceasefire. This, we believe, is the best way towards ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
However, in a dramatic twist, Zelensky had to cut his trip to South Africa short following a Russian missile attack in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv as he was visiting the South African jurisdiction. Here is Zelensky through an interpreter.
We have a very fresh Russian attack this morning, more than 200 aerial targets, missiles, ballistic missiles, attack drones. Unfortunately, we have got losses, destruction at the capital, in other localities, in all of the regions of Ukraine. More than 80 people were wounded. And a girl. Here, the recovery works continue. Because of that, I decided to shorten my visit to your beautiful country.
In reaction to the confirmed attack in Kyiv, Ramaphosa condemned the attack and stressed that the attacks in Kyiv were not linked to President Zelensky's visit to South Africa as the war continues to unfold unpredictably.
It is awful, and I would not attribute the attacks that happened in Kyiv to President Zelensky's visit here, because the war manifests itself in many ways and at any time, and that is why we're calling for an end to this war. This is a war that has not only affected Russia or Ukraine, it has also affected a number of other countries. That is why the African Peace Initiative leaders went to Kyiv and Moscow to plead.
Well, as we've been hearing, it's been a high-profile and symbolic visit cut short by war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in South Africa on Wednesday, and his trip to the continent seeking to build stronger diplomatic ties and garner support from African nations. But just hours later, he was forced to return home after a deadly barrage of Russian missiles and drone attacks on Kyiv, claiming the lives of at least 8 people, which is being reported. Whilst in South Africa, President Zelensky held talks with President Cyril Ramaphosa, who reiterated Pretoria's call for peace talks between Russia and Ukraine without any preconditions. especially those that require territorial concessions from Ukraine. Well, to unpack the significance of this visit and what it reveals about South Africa's foreign policy positioning, we're now joined on the line by Sanusha Naidu, who's a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Global Dialogue and a Foreign Policy Analyst at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha is going to be talking to us about the significance of this visit and what it might mean, actually. During the course of President Ramaphosa's media briefing, he talked about having conversations with President Trump. And one gets a sense that Donald Trump's position on the Ukraine-Russia conflict is softening a little bit. He came in right at the beginning. You'll remember that infamous interaction that he had with President Zelensky at the White House. But he does seem to have stepped that back a little bit and perhaps not all gung-ho for Russia as he was before. And these talks that he's having that are planned for communication with President Ramaphosa and Trump, again an indicator that perhaps he's softening his stance even towards South Africa. We'll try and make sense of that with Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Global Dialogue, to help us unpack that situation. And speculation will be, of course, that why would Russia mount a barrage of missiles on Kyiv whilst the president was in South Africa? Was it a coincidence? President Ramaphosa seems to think that war manifests in its own ways and that we shouldn't read too much into it. But speculators may probably think otherwise, and maybe not a great look for peace, that whilst one of the proponents is busy trying to find a solution, you bomb their capital city. But anyway, let's talk to Sanusha Naidu now from the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, always good to have you on the program. Welcome.
Good morning, Peter, and always great to be on the program. Hope you're well.
Yes, we're all good. President Zelensky's visit to South Africa, it was brief at the end, but I guess symbolic in many ways. What do you make of the timing and the significance of this visit?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, it was had to be cut short because of the situation back in Ukraine and the need for President Zelensky to return to actually assess the structural issues, the damage, and the implications going forward in terms of the ceasefire and the peace talks. I think it comes at a time where we kind of see the bigger actors in the global arena, particularly in terms of where the challenges lie in the context of trying to find a negotiated peace agreement, a ceasefire, etc. It comes at that very, very tumultuous agenda we see in the international system. And what's interesting is that at the same time, I think it raises the question of really who's going to be that broker around the peace negotiations. Now, South Africa has played that role. I think what was interesting in the short press brief that was given following the visit by the two presidents is really this understanding of the delicate nature of what are the underlying conditions for the ceasefire, for going into some kind of negotiations. And I think where the interesting dynamic lies is the conditionalities that seem to be put on the table by not just, I think, Putin, but also by actors like Trump trying to spearhead and expedite the agreement or a ceasefire. But again, it's not one that perhaps Zelensky feels comfortable with. And I think it's one that also raises questions for how does Europe, also ensure that its own engagements and its own initiatives and interventions are not necessarily being expedited without understanding the implications this has for the greater architecture and structural conditions of Europe.
I am fascinated by one of the things that President Ramaphosa said. He said that there was a need for peace talks without preconditions, such as Ukraine ceding territory. How do you interpret South Africa's positioning in this war? Because Russia has been quite adamant, is particularly around issues of territory, Crimea, for example.
Yeah, it was a very pertinent point, and it also caught my ears kind of lit up in a sense, to say, hang on, there's an interesting dynamic here that President Ramaphosa has very interestingly integrated into his comments in how you would go about these kinds of discussions without preconditions, and the reference to South Africa, the negotiated settlement, and the preconditions around that. I think it also kind of, in a kind of fascinating way, but also in a way that aligns to perhaps the way South Africa perceives and the Ramaphosa presidency, particularly the ANC and the Ramaphosa presidency, also perceives the whole situation around the Palestine-Israel context, around land, around not ceding land as a precondition for having some kind of ceasefire, having some kind of the issue around the challenges. So in a way, it kind of he referenced it in a way that says, well, hang on, you're not going to go. You can't have a talk where already there's a precondition on the table. And I was listening last night to Christine Amapua on CNN raising this very same question with the envoy of the European Union on Ukraine, Russia, and the question was, the similar point about the ceasefire and how does this question around conditions be addressed, and it was the same question. You're not going to be able to understand what the discussions would be like, the negotiations would be like, if indeed you go in with these preconditions. And so I think there's a dynamic here that also raises the same issue with regard to other conflicts in Africa around how do you approach those as well.
One gets a sense, though, because I remember the first time that President Ramaphosa was part of an entourage that went to Ukraine and Russia, a lot of people thought, what can actually Africa contribute to this? But one gets a sense, and I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly, that even Donald Trump seems to be thinking, okay, maybe this is a vehicle that we can use, because President Ramaphosa was talking about talks that they were having. It seems as if there are conversations happening behind closed doors, and that South Africa, maybe because of its BRICS partnership, and it looks as if, again, Volodymyr Zelensky also trusts President Ramaphosa, that South Africa could genuinely be a broker.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a way you strategically position the whole issue around the relationship, because remember also last year there was the Swiss peace plan or the Swiss engagement around the peace plan for Ukraine and so forth, and where South Africa was invited and of course then issued a statement around that whole discussion, but didn't necessarily speak at the peace intervention. So is President Ramaphosa that strategic kind of actor that could push around the space? I think on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, it's challenging, because the question is what is happening in the U.S. and why there's this whole question around anger between Trump and Zelensky. And then, of course, the other interesting dynamic is the fact that being in BRICS doesn't necessarily mean Putin agrees that South Africa should be engaging or may not even feel that South Africa should be talking to Zelensky. So there's all of these different moving parts at play in this context, and we have to start asking ourselves is what is the underlying intentions and what's the intentionalities of these different actors, and how does South Africa navigate that minefield of international relations where there's the behind-the-scenes vested interest.
Sanusha, we're going to have to leave it there, but your insights always greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Take care.
It was Sanusha Naidu giving us her thoughts on President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to South Africa, meeting with President Ramaphosa.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
A new vaccine confidence report by global pharmaceutical company MSD reveals that 71% of South Africans are hesitant to take vaccines, one of the highest rates in the Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa or EEMEA region. The findings raise critical concerns around public trust, workforce health, and economic resilience. To mark World Immunization Week, MSD hosted a high-level virtual meeting roundtable where leading health experts from across the continent unpacked the data and explored how vaccine confidence influences long-term investment in public health, education, and productivity. To speak to us about this, we're joined on the line now by Professor Haneli Meyer, who is report co-author from the South African Vaccination and Immunization Center. Professor Meyer, thank you for making time. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Very well, thanks. And yourself?
Good, thank you. We appreciate your time. What are the key factors that are driving this high rate of vaccine hesitancy in South Africa and the continent, as highlighted by this vaccine confidence report?
You know, one of the main factors driving vaccine hesitancy is the misinformation that's being spread, and particularly on social media. So people are being influenced by what they hear and what they see in the media. So these kind of messages then result in negative perceptions, and it continues to undermine public understanding and trust in the vaccines. And often spreading these unfounded fears around infertility, still around autism, microchipping, and so on. So that results, as I said, in decreased confidence. It creates fear about the safety of the vaccines, and people then become anxious as a result, and then they refuse vaccination. Another very important factor is people's perceptions about the safety of the vaccine. So one of the main concerns people have is the safety and the side effects of the vaccines, and also questions around the efficacy of vaccines, including things like what is contained in vaccines. Then another factor we identified was also institutional mistrust, low confidence in the government, pharmaceutical entities, even sciences, whether they will really develop, make sure vaccines are safe and effective. And then there are also, access barriers, so the convenience of accessing vaccines. And then another one, what we normally refer to as complacency. People don't see these diseases anymore, and they feel kind of they are distant, and then it makes it more difficult for them to realize that I need to go and get vaccinated. And then lastly, also cultural and religious beliefs that can also influence people's decision making around vaccination.
So how do we strengthen education and awareness drives when it comes to vaccination, given all the impediments to why people are not coming forward and vaccinating that you've just given us? And what role can government play in that?
I always say it's very important to have a collaborative effort. Government needs to work together also with the private sector. And one of the most important things is to have unified messaging. We need to go out and across all sectors with the same voice. We need to, very important, reinforce science-based information. So we need to provide people with evidence, with the facts, and also focusing on the personal benefits of vaccines. And this will help to counter all this misinformation. Then very important is community-based strategies. So we need to make sure that the initiatives is localized, understand what are the needs of the communities, listen to the concerns, use vernacular languages, relevant, culturally relevant formats and trusted messages. Another very powerful thing is to empower local influencers. You need to identify people who will be able to influence others within their context. And the research has shown that healthcare workers are some of the most trusted people when it comes to decision making. So we need to empower them with the necessary, knowledge as well as communication skills. Second to that, educators and faith leaders. Then, transparent communication, be open about side effects, be open about unknown information. And then, providing access to vaccines. That goes with the community-based strategies. Make it easier for people to access the vaccines within their context where it's easier for them to access the vaccines.
Today, we also mark World Malaria Day, coinciding with World Immunization Week. During that roundtable, were there any successful strategies or regional best practices shared that could help decrease malaria and also increase the vaccine or immunization uptake in Africa for malaria?
Yes. You know what? It goes hand in hand with, focusing on the context and the community. So something that was very, important and discussed by everybody on the meeting was to tailor the interventions because one size does not fit all. So what you use here might not be applicable, say, for instance, amongst elderly people, might not be relevant for adolescents, for example. So we need to shape our programs around that. Something else very important, like I also mentioned earlier, is this communication. We need to communicate in people's home languages. They do not understand, signs when it comes to, when you communicate those not in your home language. Really, a good example was from Uganda, where they have a comic book specifically around the HPV vaccine, and that is now already being translated in many different languages. Make use of radio spots, TV spots, illustrations, and then, like I mentioned, influencers, and specifically healthcare worker training. Empower the healthcare workers so that they can influence those that they communicate and interact with on a daily basis.
All right. Thanks so much for your time, Professor. We're going to leave it there for today. And I don't know, do I say Happy World Immunization Week? I guess strides have been made. We've made progress.
Yes. Yes, let's vaccinate everybody. And, as the WHO and UNICEF said, it is humanly possible if we all work together. But thanks for having me on your program this morning.
Our pleasure. Professor Haneli Meyer from the South African Vaccination and Immunization Center talking to us on the line here on Africa Rise and Shine. It's 31 minutes past 7 Central African time. Good morning. If you've just joined us, let's get the latest in terms of news headlines from Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. At least 10 people have been killed in a gold mine collapse in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The M23 rebels have seized East Congo's two biggest cities since January in an escalation of a long-running conflict rooted in the spillover into Congo of Rwanda's 1994 genocide and the struggle for control of Congo's vast mineral resources. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and US President Donald Trump have agreed to meet soon to discuss relations between the two countries. Tensions have been high between the two countries after Trump accused the South African government of allowing attacks against the Afrikaner farming communities. And a medical team treating former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro says his health condition is deteriorating. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
It's time to find out what's happening in the world of sports, especially ahead of a weekend. Here's Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Very good morning once again from the sports desk. So we're looking forward to the second legs of the CAF Champions League this morning. Pyramids FC and Orlando Pirates are poised for a make-or-break showdown tonight in Cairo, with the coveted spot in the Total Energies CAF Champions League final at stake tonight. After a tightly contested goalless draw in the first leg at the FNB Stadium just last weekend, the tie remains balanced heading into the second leg at the Cairo International Stadium tonight. Both sides will need to dig deep to break the deadlock and book their tickets to the final. Now, the Egyptian outfit will look to continue their imperious home form. Pyramids have won all of their 4 games in the CAF Champions League. Those are home fixtures this season, racking up also 17 goals as always, also conceding just 3. They also boast an incredible 22-match unbeaten run at home in all competitions, a record that could prove crucial in such a high-pressure encounter. So tonight's match between Pyramids FC as well as Orlando Pirates will kick off at 8 p.m. Central African time. But 2 hours earlier, Al Ahly will face off with Mamelodi Sundowns in a blockbuster clash tonight at the Cairo International Stadium as they battle for a place in the final of the Total Energies CAF Champions League. With the first leg in Pretoria ending goalless also last weekend, everything is still in to play for in this highly anticipated second leg encounter. So despite Al Ahly's rich history as well as dominance in African club football, it is Sundowns who have held the upper hand in recent meetings between the two teams. The South African Giants are unbeaten in their last 8 matches against the Cairo club, scoring 11 goals and conceding just 5 in that run. Al Ahly meanwhile have not defeated Sundowns since May of 2021 and will be looking to overturn that trend on home soil tonight. So the hosts have been rock solid at the back in the season's Champions League, keeping 3 consecutive clean sheets. Their defensive resilience also will be key against Sundowns tonight, especially against obviously a Sundowns side that knows how to score but have failed to score in their last 216 minutes of continental action. Back home now, World Under-20, 100 as well as 200-meter champion Bayanda Walaza has expressed his disappointment over the absence of his idol, Akani Simbeni, at the national championships. The 19-year-old who finished in second place in the final of the 100-meter event at the Park MacArthur Stadium in Potchefstroom in the Northwest Province on Thursday said it was heartbreaking not to compete against the South African record holder as well as multiple national champion. Simbeni opted to skip the event to focus on Saturday's Diamond League meeting in China. He had been looking forward to going head-to-head with one of his biggest inspirations in running.
We truly wanted to race against him, because even though we win, but it won't be the same as when he was here. You can be the SA champion, you're SA champion, but he's not there. We're not sure if you're faster than him. The goal is to beat the best. In the sports, that's how the sport works. You need to beat the best to be the best. So for him to be not here, also knows that everyone in here in South Africa wants to be the best. They know that they have to beat him, and he's not here. I'm heartbroken.
On to tennis news now. Carlos Alcaraz has pulled out of his home tournament at the Madrid Open due to a right leg injury. Alcaraz told the press in Madrid on Thursday that he had been forced to withdraw, as he also revealed he had been struggling with a left hamstring issue. The Spaniard required treatment on his right groin during his Barcelona Open final defeat to Jorge Rune just last weekend and subsequently underwent MRI tests. Now, those tests have since revealed a problem with his right leg abductor, which has forced the 4-time Grand Slam champion to withdraw from the ATP 1000 Masters event. Alcaraz won the Monte Carlo Masters earlier this month before continuing his winning streak at the Barcelona Open to reach the final against Rune, but the 21-year-old experienced discomfort during a 7-6, 6-2 defeat and has now decided against attempting to win a third Madrid title following victories on the clay court back in 2022 and 2023. Igor Swiatek, meanwhile, avoided another shock defeat against Filipina teenager Alexandria Ella by fighting back to win the Madrid Open second round match on Thursday. World number 2 Swiatek, who was stunned by Ella in Miami just last month, won 4-6, 6-4 and 6-2 on the Spanish claim. A sticky start appeared to justify some pre-match talk that Swiatek might have issues dealing with the teenage opponent. Swiatek lost in the Stuttgart Open quarterfinals just last week, and having also received a bye in the Madrid first round, produced some edgy ground strokes in a poor first set. So a tally of about 25 unforced errors indicated it was a performance nowhere near befitting of a WTA Tour's dominant clay court player in recent seasons. That concludes your sports news this hour. I'm back with the final sports update on Africa Rise and Shine in the next hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on the newsroom line +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu D. Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. The Midnight Snack. Every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege.
That is just me trying to imagine myself as a backup singer for Zonke, because her music is just beautiful. As the song was playing, I was just, moving like a backup singer. You know how they are, with their hands being so dramatic and, putting that spice into the song. So the song is called Say Now, and we love it here on the Midnight Snack. I hope you also love it.
Let's talk love, intimacy, and relationships on the Midnight Snack with Chanduko Ligege. Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Let's get more reaction on South Africa's VAT increase reversal, and opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, weigh in. Let's find out in what way as we get business and economics news now with Eva Chipa.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Asanda. The Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa says the celebrations around the reversal of the 0.5 basis point are premature. EFF spokesperson Sinawa Tambo says the political point scoring has parties rushing to claim victory for the reversal without interrogating the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's announcement. In a statement, the minister says that he will introduce a rate and monetary amounts bill together with the rates bill, where he will propose that the value-added tax remain at the current level of 15%. Tambo says there is no clarity on how the reversal would be implemented.
What the minister has released over midnight is a statement wherein he states his intention to propose an amendment bill in Parliament. So first and foremost, that statement doesn't say anywhere that immediately he has got the power to decree the reversal of the VAT hikes. That's the first thing that South Africans need to be aware of. We're not trying to burst anyone's bubble. We understand that there's a rush for everyone to claim a victory over the reversal of the VAT hike. There's no reversal of the VAT hike that is in effect right now.
Meanwhile, the Good Party leader in South Africa, Patricia de Lille, has criticized the Democratic Alliance for misleading the public by claiming victory for the reversal of the 0.5 VAT increase. De Lille says the credit must go to parties that participated in the intense discussions.
Some misguided reporter this morning said that South Africa must thank the Blue Party for going to court and stopping that. We must get the independence of the Fourth Estate to be respected. Certainly people are entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. Because the fact is, what we are witnessing here today is a budget victory through principled negotiations and political maturity. And so we must make an appeal that we keep that balance, because the truth will always survive.
Traders say Kenya's shilling has lost some ground against the dollar amid a muted foreign exchange appetite after bouncing high on Thursday as offshore investors sought domestic bonds. Commercial banks quoted the shilling at 129.10 to 129.60 per dollar, compared with Wednesday's closing rate of 128.90 to 129.40. In neighbouring Uganda, the shilling has held its levels against the dollar, supported by hard currency inflows from aid agencies. In other news, Atlantic Lithium is continuing negotiations with Ghana's government to salvage its Iowa lithium project. The negotiations come as falling prices of the critical battery metal cast a shadow on the viability of the West African nation's maiden lithium mine. The Australia-based miner is seeking concessions on Ghana's new mining revenue framework, which includes a 10% free carried interest for the state and a special 13% royalty on gross revenue from lithium production. Africa's lead gold producer, Ghana, granted the Australian miner a 15-year lease to establish the mine by late 2024, hoping to capitalize on the EV boom. And lastly, the British Finance Minister, Rachel Reeves, says she's confident that Britain and the US could reach a trade deal to reduce the hit from President Donald Trump's import tariffs. Reeves says Britain was not in a rush to secure a deal, and she ruled out making concessions on food standards in the talks. Reeves has, however, stressed that she stands with the Trump administration on its worries about China's trade policies. Taking a look at your financial indicators, $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 610. In Botswana, it's 13 pula 58. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 59. And in Zambia, it's 28 kwacha 26. To the BRICS countries now, where $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 reals 69. Russia, 83 rubles 9 cents. India, 85 rupees 36. China, 7 yuan 29. And in South Africa, it's 18 rand 70 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is standing at $3,348, platinum at $968 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is at $66.81 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2 711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business News, I'm Eva Chipa.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Start your day inspired and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Right, it's 7:46 Central African Time. US President Donald Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. In fact, this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about. I mean, the South African rand held steady on Thursday. This after Finance Ministry scrapped a controversial VAT hike for next month. The rate stays at 15%, offering some relief to investors ahead of the delayed national budget. Globally, markets are watching for signs of easing tensions between US and China, whilst the IMF has downgraded its growth forecast for Africa, citing multiple shocks. Well, to unpack some of these market moves, we're now joined by Chantal Marx, who's the head of investment research at FNB Wealth and Investments. Chantal, good to talk to you again. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure.
Let's start with this VAT reversal. Great news for consumers, but what message does it send to the investors, and how is it playing out in the market?
Well, so far, as you mentioned, the rand response has been relatively benign. And I had a quick look at South Africa's bond yields as well this morning. And we saw a meaningful track downwards. Now, With yields, we mean that the funding cost has actually declined and the prices have increased. So it's a positive response to the VAT announcement. Of course, there could be several other external factors at play as well. But I think that what the market liked about this was the fact that there was a resolution without the government of national unity falling apart just yet. So I think the political stability and the fact that we're at a point where we know what's going on means a lot more than what the 0.5% increase in VAT is going to mean for the fiscus, at least from an investment perspective. I think investors think that the Finance Ministry and National Treasury have the capability to alter revenue and expenditure, the revenue and expenditure framework to get to a point where we don't see fiscal slippage because we don't see a VAT increase.
Okay, so there's been talk of a thaw in US-China tensions. How could that shape the outlook for emerging markets like South Africa?
Well, it's very important to get a resolution to that as well. Of course, these trade tensions have escalated over the last few weeks, and over the last couple of days, we've actually seen positive commentary coming through from the U.S. U.S. President Donald Trump saying that he's going to be nice to China in those negotiations. So I think that that's a step in a positive direction. However, we know that the U.S. President and the U.S. administration have been changing their mind a lot. So I think we're still a little bit uncertain in terms of how it's going to play out. But if we get a resolution and if we can see those tariffs coming down, I think it will be very positive from a global supply chain perspective. And I think it will be positive for emerging markets more generally as well.
Other chatter that's coming through, big banks are warning of a possible global recession. What's your take, and what will it mean for African markets?
Yes, so a possible global recession, I think, is still an outside chance of that happening. The main reason being that some of the faster growing economies in the world that are quite sizable are not expected to necessarily go into recession. When we're talking about possible recession, most of the emphasis currently is on the likes of the US, as well as some of their smaller trading partners. But we will probably see a decline in growth out of the likes of China. So I think that it's obviously quite headline grabbing, but I won't put a full-on recession on the cards just yet. Of course, there is a chance that there will be massive knock-on impacts from the U.S. tariff regime, and that, of course, could result in continued pressure on global economic growth.
The IMF has cut growth forecasts for Africa. What do you think is behind this, and how exposed are we to global shocks?
I think it's absolutely a function of the tariff impacts and the volatility in terms of geopolitics and kind of general trade at the moment. Most of the economies in Africa are small open economies, so they are very dependent on foreign flows and foreign investment. And when you get a situation where there's so much uncertainty, investors tend to pull back. They tend to pull back on plans of foreign direct investment, and you can also see a knock-on impact on portfolio flows as they are looking for safer spaces to hold their money. And by safer spaces, I mean probably cash and gold and not necessarily other big markets. They'll look for that safety while we try and figure out what the path ahead is going to look like.
All right, and very briefly, because we're running out of time, what key trends or risks should we be watching for in African markets over the next few weeks?
I think it's still going to be very externally driven. So I think we need to keep a very close eye on the US dollar and what the US dollar does. And then, of course, a lot of African countries are quite geared towards the oil price. And there we have seen pressure more recently, some stability coming into a very pressured oil price. But any further knock on the economic growth outlook could have a negative impact on oil prices. And then for other economies that are more metals focused, I think metal prices also to be watched quite closely. We've seen quite divergent impacts of a recent lowering of global growth expectations on different metal prices. But I think that will be quite key when we're looking to figure out what growth is going to look like specifically this year.
Chantal, always great having you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. That's Chantal Marks, Head of Investment Research at FNB Wealth and Investments, making sense of this week on our markets.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Well, today, as we move on to the next story now for this hour, South African National Biodiversity Institute, Asanda, alongside partners across Africa, are taking part in the Global City Nature Challenge 2025. This is from today, the 25th to the 28th of April. This event encourages people of all ages to explore their surroundings, document local biodiversity, and contribute to a worldwide effort to better understand life on Earth. Joining us to share more is Nontsikelelo Mpulo, who is Director for Marketing, Communications and Commercialization at Asanda. Nontsikelelo, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on the show.
It's our pleasure. What is the main goal of this City Nature Challenge, and why is it important for countries across Africa to be part?
So the City Nature Challenge was established in Los Angeles and San Francisco in about 2016, but it's since grown into a worldwide movement. Last year, 37 countries, cities in Africa participated, and 10 countries. South Africa actually led the African recordings last year, so we are championing this again this year because what we have to understand what our biodiversity looks like in order to be able to manage it, to celebrate it, and also to restore it. We've noted in the last decade particularly that biodiversity loss and degradation has been increasing, and that has an impact in terms of people's livelihoods and the impact obviously that you've seen in terms of climate change. So what we want to encourage people to do is to be aware of the nature in their surroundings and to take care of it. And this is the City Nature Challenge is just one of the implements that we use for that purpose.
Let's talk about how we measure biodiversity in our ecosystems as a way to better understand life on Earth. You talk about degradation, you talk about climate change.
So Asanda is mandated by the NEMBA Act to actually report on the status of biodiversity in this country. We submit a report every 4 to 5 years. In fact, a new one is scheduled to be published later on this year. And what we look at is the state of our streams, our rivers, the oceans. We look at the state of our forests. We look at the state of not necessarily agricultural land, but land that is outside of agriculture, but what is called mega living spaces. So outside of protected areas and outside of agricultural land, so everywhere else. And we do this monitoring. We have people who actually work with farmers. We work with landowners to establish what species there are. And the reason why we do that, obviously, is to make sure that those ecosystems are alive, thriving, to actually make the living on this planet worthwhile. Sort of what we did last week was talk about planting indigenous trees. And the reason why we do those kinds of things is to make sure that there's oxygen so that people can breathe and animals can live. And we're all interconnected as one. So people and nature need to thrive together. And that's why we do the kinds of things that we do in terms of biodiversity monitoring and participating in the City Nature Challenge. It's about building community awareness and building community around biodiversity.
And as a point on that community awareness, when we talk biodiversity, it changes over time because all living things evolve at some point. But how often do we take these changes and evolution into consideration as a way of gathering information we can use to update our own biodiversity measures?
So this is why the City Nature Challenge is a very useful tool, because it's an annual assessment by community, by citizens. Citizen Science Program does that kind of monitoring on an ongoing basis. But this is a nice inflection point for us to bring communities with us on our journey. For example, I'll tell you that our Citizen Science Program does monitoring in the Northern Cape, where we have seen a huge decline in succulent plants due to poaching. And so we want to use this opportunity also to make people aware that there are syndicates out there who are stripping the succulent biomes, succulent Karoo, of these wonderful old plants that sustain life in the harshest environments. And so we want people to keep an eye out and notify authorities if they see suspicious behavior in those areas. But again, it's about making sure that we take care of biodiversity ourselves. It's our natural heritage, and it is incumbent upon us to look after it.
So how can citizens across the continent get involved in the challenge, and will they need any special training? I guess you mentioned two answers to that people must report when they see somebody destroying our ecosystems, and also to educate themselves.
100%. But for the City Nature Challenge, there's an app that is available on the two iOS and Android, and it's called the iNaturalist app. And you just download the app, and then you go into the environment, your local park, your city, whatever it is where you see nature, and take a picture and upload it on there. And then people who moderate these things will have a look and see if this is a new species that's been identified in this area. As you said, there's lots of changes that happen. There's migrations. So we want to be able to track whether butterflies are moving from one area to another, and we might investigate as to why that would happen. But that is the purpose of doing these kinds of things. So you just upload your observation in your area, and also just tag which area you're in.
And let's do that. Let's upload that iNaturalist app, not just for the 25th until the 28th, but moving forward to support this cause. Thanks again for your time, Nontsikelelo.
Thank you very much.
Nontsikelelo Mpulo is Director for Marketing, Communications and Commercialization at the South African National Biodiversity Institute, or SANBI. That's our last chat for this hour. And we're heading to the next hour.
Yes, indeed. And
8 o'clock.
We're going to be looking at something quite fascinating, which I think became quite a thing once we hit COVID, and that's remote work. And for a long time, people were working from home, got used to it, and then there was a call for people to come back to work. But I think it's become a thing now because you had to enable that remote work. So we'll be taking a look at what that means and how it's changed and how it's changing the workplace. Are people more productive?
Things that we only heard of but never experienced in our field.
I mean, the idea...
Because we had to come in studio all the time.
The idea of working in your pajamas all day. That's all coming up. And don't forget, we are streaming live on www.channelafrica.co.za.
Let's just thank the team as well quickly. On technical production is Catherine Maleka. On social media is Talent Butelezi. On production, Hlengiwe Mabaso and Joey Likhodi. On news is Onele Nzinzi. On sports, Musubudi Makura. And economics news are by Eva Chipa today. Let's go to Onele Nzinzi for our first, this is going to be the last update actually for Rise and Shine on this Friday.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. At least 10 people have been killed in a gold mine collapse in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The M23 appointed South Kivu Governor Douglas Masumbuko reported that toll at the Luhihi mine had reached 10 and could rise given the number of injuries. The M23 rebels have seized East Congo's two biggest cities since January in an escalation of a long-running conflict rooted in the spillover into Congo of Rwanda's 1994 genocide and the struggle for control of Congo's vast mineral resources. Masumbuko has blamed the incident on uncontrolled construction destruction and poor maintenance of gold wells. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and US President Donald Trump have agreed to meet soon to discuss relations between the two countries. Tensions have been high between the two countries after Trump accused the South African government of allowing attacks against Afrikaner farming communities. Ramaphosa confirmed that the two heads of state had a telephonic conversation with a big focus on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict and efforts towards peace. Ramaphosa was speaking from the Union Buildings in Pretoria during a working visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I had an opportunity to speak to President Trump yesterday, or this morning rather, to discuss the peace process in Ukraine. We both agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction. President Trump and I also agreed to meet soon to address the various other matters regarding our relations between South Africa and the United States. We both spoke about the need to foster good relations between our two countries.
The Usindiso building fire trial is expected to continue today in the High Court in Johannesburg, South Africa. Yesterday, the court heard that drugs did not seem to impair alleged arsonist Sithembiso Mdlalose when he confessed to causing the fire in which 76 people died in 2023, majority of which were foreign nationals. Mdlalose's lawyer argued that his client was under the influence of drugs when he made the alleged confession. Mdlalose has pleaded not guilty to all counts of murder, attempted murder and arson. Court interpreter Mpho Matsewane explains what happened on the day of the alleged confession.
The accused person appeared to be of sound and sober senses. However, what was striking about him was that he appeared to be burdened. Added to that, whilst we were proceeding with the confession, he would respond before I would interpret to him, which gave an impression that he could comprehend English.
The appeals chamber of the International Criminal Court has upheld an appeal by Israel challenging the jurisdiction of the court in relation to its investigations into alleged war crimes in Gaza. The appeals chamber ruled that the pretrial chamber committed an error in law by failing to address Israel's argument that it was entitled to making a jurisdictional challenge under pertinent articles of the Rome Statute, Sean Bryce Peace reports.
The appeals chamber reversed the pre-trial chamber's decision and remanded the matter back to the lower chamber for a new ruling on the substance of Israel's challenge to the jurisdiction of the court. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan in November last year issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for alleged war crimes in Gaza. Israel's challenge to the ICC's jurisdiction hinges on its arguments that it is not a party to the Rome Statute and that Palestine is not a fully fledged state and that the ICC therefore cannot exercise jurisdiction over matters related to the conflict in Gaza. The pretrial chamber earlier ruled that the court's territorial jurisdiction extended to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Sherwin Brycepe's SABC News, New York.
And lastly, a medical team treating former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro after an intestinal surgery says his health condition has deteriorated. On Wednesday, a Supreme Court official summoned Bolsonaro and gave him 5 days in which to present his defense against charges that he had plotted a military coup against President Lula. The BBC's Leonardo Rocha.
The former president, who is 70, he's been in hospital for nearly 2 weeks. He was admitted with severe pain and he underwent intestinal surgery for about 12 hours. So it's a very delicate situation. He's had many problems, 6 operations, I believe, since he was stabbed during the electoral campaign in 2018.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Jacob Kiblimo ready for a full marathon debut at Sunday's London Marathon. And Al Ali will count on the energy of their influential supporters when they host Mamelodi Sundowns in the second leg of the CAF Champions League tonight. I'll have details of these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Remember, you can find us on our social media pages. We are on X, we are on Instagram, we are on TikTok as @Channel Africa 1, and you can find us on Facebook at Channel Africa. That's our page there. We're live streaming, if you didn't catch us earlier saying that today, as well as the coming days. We've been doing it for quite some time now. So we are on YouTube if you want to log in there and see us live in studio. Now, work has evolved, and the way companies operate and hire in industries globally has changed. Global pandemic, COVID-19, technology and artificial intelligence are all factors transforming the workplace and leading to increased remote work. The digital nomad lifestyle has surged in popularity, with 40 million people worldwide estimated to be working remotely. But what does working from home mean? To discuss, we are joined by Yvonne Feka, who's Director in Employment Law at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. Yvonne, thank you for making time for us this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Asanda.
So it's not as simple as it was COVID-19 that got us here. It seems like we were going to come to this place anyway because of technological advances and artificial intelligence. Are we aware of this, and are we taking it into consideration that it wasn't just 2019, 2020 that got us here?
I must say that I think because it came as a part of COVID that people started getting shocked and treating this as a novel thing. This is definitely not brand new. Flexible work has been there for time immemorial. We know that it was for a select few people who are in senior and executive roles, and they could negotiate themselves into these working arrangements, flexible working arrangements. But because it was accelerated, COVID was such an equalizer. There were people that we never thought that would be able to work from home or remotely, and suddenly we were sent home to work from home, and we were given the equipment. So it's nothing new. It's just that it was accelerated, and companies, I think, they welcomed it because at the time, no one wanted to have their businesses shutting down. But suddenly, there are certain things that they're realizing now. They're requiring employees to come back to corporate offices made of brick and mortar.
So what are the considerations when it comes to remote work from a legal point of view?
So maybe to start off is that there isn't a expressed or legal or legislation that expressly caters for remote work, but there's a legal framework that one can look at. So the first thing is that the basic conditions of employment requires the employer to have written particulars and to give those to the employee. And amongst those, they must spell out where is the place of work. That's the first thing. And that is normally incorporated in the contract of employment. Now, the contract of employment, it must be very clear whether or not you are required as an employee to work from an office or remotely. And during COVID, a lot of people negotiated, or the employers allowed them to work remotely, and they expressly stated that. So what you would find in the contract of employment, either the provisions say you're working remotely exclusively, or you're working remotely, but the employer has the discretion to require you to work in any other place, or you're working on site in the corporate office with a discretion of an employer to ask you to work in another place. So depending on what your contract of employment states, then the employer has a right to require you to come back, but they must do so lawfully and fairly using the framework. And the framework on the fairness is governed by the Labour Relations Act of 1995.
So what have been some of the misperceptions or misconceptions when it comes to remote work for those workers who have found themselves in this situation?
So I guess one thing is that some employees believe that once they've been that once they start working remotely, they cannot be required to come back. Right? That's the first thing, which is not the case. What the law requires of employers is that they must do so fairly and lawfully. And what does that mean? You need to follow a process, engage the employees, so that, because remember that an employer and employee, they are in a trust relationship and an interdependent relationship. So whatever changes that needs to happen in the workplace, the two parties need to engage. And this is what is required here. So if the employer has a discretion to require you to work on site or any other place where the business requires, they need to engage you, and they also need to give you reasonable time to consider, so that you can also adjust your own home circumstances. And because most people, when you moved to work remotely, there were a lot of adjustments, including childcare or parental care. So that is something that needs to be considered. So when you say employees can't just compel, because it gives a sense that they can, at a drop of a hat, say, you need to come back to the office. And that cannot be the case, because it will also impact on productivity and the morale of employees.
Yes, and on that, impacting the worker morale, can it contribute, this remote work, to social isolation and even maybe lower levels of work-colleague relations?
Absolutely, and we have seen it, because I think as we were being asked in South Africa to come back to the office, there was a lot of resistance. But resistance must also be seen as part of change. So when you are with COVID, we didn't have a choice. People were given laptops and they were sent home because no one wanted to wanted to contract the virus and die. But coming back, the change itself must be managed in a way that any other change is managed in the organization, because you also don't want to compromise your business from a productivity perspective and an employee engagement perspective. The culture that you want to build as an organization also is paramount. So you can't be draconian about how you're bringing people back. So that is why I'm emphasizing that level of engagement, that even at a point when an employee says, I am not willing to come back, as an employer, we're able to take necessary steps to get them to come back, or if they want to follow a dispute resolution process, you know that you have done everything that is required of you to do.
Are there certain cultures or labor systems or even industries that are better suited for remote work?
So we've seen that with people in the IT, because it has become really one big workplace globally for people who are within the IT spaces, like developers. I've seen some of our clients coming to us to say we are struggling with, or we are being seen to be differentiating, and now we want to understand whether we are exposed, because we've got a category of employees like developers who are just not willing. They're actually threatening that if you force me to come back, I'm going to quit. And because it's a scarce skill and it's a critical skill, and they can work anywhere in the world. So the bargaining power of employers is actually tilted against them, because the developers are actually, they can be employed anyway. So they have a bargaining power. That's when you're talking about negotiation power becoming relevant, you see this category of employees having the power to negotiate otherwise. And I cannot say that for other employees.
Yeah. We've recently seen reports, one namely Google, having notified their remote workers that their jobs will be in jeopardy if they don't show up at the office 3 times a week. Others, like Amazon and Dell, are mandating employees to return to the office for the full 5-day work week. Legally, can workers be compelled to return to work?
Yeah, so I know when you're talking about compare, it sounds so drastic, and it sounds as if it has to happen at the top of a hat. Maybe let's start here, that the engagement that needs to precede this requirement is for employers to explain to employees why it's critical that they return to work. And there's been a myriad of reasons that employers have put forward. One of them is just an operational need. productivity, organizational culture. And they also speak about tacit, or what they call it, inorganic learning and development of employees, which happens, when we are in the same space, and what they normally call a water cooler conversation. And people are entering the workplace and are not in the presence of other colleagues. They actually don't learn and develop in the same speed as others who have had that opportunity. So those are the things that has been put forward. And that engagement allows both parties to engage and see whether there are alternatives to achieve this. And if there are not, if there aren't any alternatives, then the employer can then say, because we need this for this business to thrive, you need to come back. And if the employee is not willing to do it, so after that engagement, the employer can then say, I'm giving you this much time for you to make the adjustments, and then you need to come back.
All right. Can we say that now in 2025 we've reached a stable home-work ratio?
So anecdotally, right? I cannot say this in terms of. I'm still hearing employers or clients say that they are still getting that level of resistance, and or employees still asking, "Can I work remotely?" And you'll recall that up until 2020 and 2019, we were all going back to the office, right? We were all reported to the office. It seemed to have been in the 3 to 4 years, people have realized that actually we can do more, working remotely. But we also know that there were downsides to it, that people would not switch off, and which led to burnout and so forth. So a balance is needed, but I cannot say the ratio is 50-50 at this point in time.
All right. Let's leave it there, Yvonne. Thanks so much for your time again, and a great weekend to you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Thanks. Yvonne Mfeka is Director in Employment Law at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. Interesting question there. We're going to continue with that chat and get more enlightenment and analysis in just a bit.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
So we've just heard the legal landscape around remote work continues to evolve, this in response to shifting workplace norms. But beyond policies and contracts lies the real human experience, one marked by psychological adjustment and new routines, and for many actually blurred boundaries between work and personal life. The COVID-19 pandemic may have accelerated the shift, but even years later, employees and organizations alike are still navigating its mental and emotional aftermath. And to explore the psychological effects of remote work, both positive and negative, we're now joined by Babalwa Desi, who's an industrial psychologist who, beyond her consultancy work, contributes to discussions on mental wellness and career development. Babalwa, thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start with this psychological shift. What were some of the most common emotional and behavioral changes that one observed when employees were suddenly moved to remote work during the pandemic?
I think it's a mixed bag of issues. One, I think, is the isolation from the social network that you would have been accustomed to in the office block, as you are making your coffee, as you are, walking down the passage, your colleagues are with you. And that is it affects people differently depending on where you are at and how you are wired. For people that are not, that are self-sufficient and not necessarily reliant on social interaction, so that doesn't really affect them. In fact, they become more appreciative of the solitude space. And people that do thrive on that, you would find them almost in mourning around the fact that, I'm away from my engagement space with my colleagues. So it depends on who you are and where you are at, and also it depends on your life stage and also what's happening in your personal space. For people who are, parents, for example, I think the benefit of having to work at home is appreciated in one way or another, depending on how old your little people are, and also the opportunity for you to configure your time in your day in the way that best suits you. For example, some people are more thriving, in the afternoon as opposed to morning. Other people are thriving in the nighttime, in terms of how they are wired, in terms of productivity levels in the course of the day. Other people are early morning people, like 4 a.m.
That's us.
People very much up and active, but by midday, 12 o'clock, their clock is kind of downward spiraling. So it's a mixed bag.
Right.
I think it goes to show that people, it's never a one-size-fits-all kind of a situation, and the corporate spaces are not always accommodating of that fact.
So have these psychological effects lingered? I mean, COVID did last for quite a while, and go back to what we were, I don't think is 100% possible. So have some of these effects, the new way of thinking, new way of being, lingered?
Most definitely, I think so. And I think also because the nature of work is changing. There's a lot of shifts that are happening in how, the traditional nature of work has been and has always been up to where we are at now. There's a lot of people that are in their middle age reconsidering or reviewing where they are at in terms of their career. There's also a lot of mixed careers now. People are not following just one track or one lane. You trained as an accountant, but now later on you've decided to infuse some of your side hustles into mainstream things that fuel your livelihood and things that energize you. People are more keen now to drive their purpose and meaning. And also now you're finding that people are reconsidering the whole idea of being confined to one space and one employer. So all of those shifts then, propel a thought to, reflect on whether this is, something that is still working for me as an individual, and also where I'm at in a stage of my life. So definitely you're finding people that are more in their own spaces. You're finding people that have now abandoned, offices. For people that are in freelance spaces and independent work, they are in home offices. Others are in, public spaces where they've adopted like a cafe, and there's a whole community of people that are working there. Others are on project-based kind of assignments. So it depends on, what energizes them. Others, go and adopt spaces in nature. But then, the more formalized corporate spaces, they kind of struggle to move with that. But there's definitely a shift and an influence to embrace those types of models.
Let's talk about this issue of a surveillance culture that's now kind of coming through quite a bit. We're seeing some companies using software to track employee activity remotely, insisting that people are visual on Teams meetings, for example, and things like that. What kind of psychological toll can this take on employees?
Yeah, I think the big challenge of the organizations is the challenge of trust. And that is infused in the nature of their culture, the organizational culture, that, we are a little bit uncomfortable, or we are unable to trust that, what we give to employees shall be done at the point in time that we require. And also it's about, the trust very much links to the culture, and culture is influenced by the leadership at play. And the two influence one another, leadership influences culture and vice versa. So I think the spaces of, the organizations that do that kind of thing, one person will, get affected differently, but I think it's a bit intrusive. It kind of sends a message that is not, in a positive light around the fact that I trust that what I entrust to you as an employee in terms of our contractual agreement shall be done, and I will evaluate that and the quality of what you deliver, and we have, authentic human-to-human conversations about it, and whether that is at the right level and standard, is what we will evaluate together in a collaborative space in the relationship. I think, a lot of organizations have not matured to operate in those spaces. Others have started to go that route, but there's an inconsistency in terms of embracing that. Others are just dead set against it altogether. It's almost like the old Taylor approaches of we want to monitor because we don't trust you. And if we are not in front of you, if I don't see your clock, then you are not doing any work. And I think in our times, where people are dealing with a lot and we've moved to embrace people as holistic beings, it's no longer a case of now your home life is at the gate when you enter the workplace. Your home life and your entire being and who you are follows you to the workplace. So all of those things are intertwined. And when you are at home, it's just another space that you are in, but it doesn't mean that you are not going to fulfill your contractual obligations and what you are about, because it's also in your interest to deliver and perform consistently. So if those conversations can get space and time in workplaces, I think, there would be more progressive shifts that happen. But again, it's the fear of the leaders to get to those spaces and to connect and to engage, sincerely with people.
All right. We're running out of time. So very briefly, how should organizations integrate psychological well-being into future remote or hybrid work modes?
I think the basics that we always forget is just the space to engage and to hear and to internalize and to just be real with one another in terms of where we are at in the world and how that is influencing the internal space of the business and the organization, and how best can we enable employees to thrive and get to maximize, what the business requires and what they are optimum. Very often we underplay the influences of, the psyche of employees as they engage and as they navigate relationships of the workplace. And very, very fundamentally, it's just the starting point of just let's be human with one another. Let's have conversations. Let me get into your space and hear. And then we see how we can, integrate your needs and also the needs of the business in a harmonious way.
All right, so that's where we're going to have to leave it. Babalwa, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate the time.
All right, that was Babalwa Desi, an industrial psychologist who, beyond her consultancy work, talks a lot about mental wellness and career development, contributing to this conversation that we had about remote work. And I love it, by the way. I don't know about you.
Very interesting one, that one. Yeah, and actually, I was thinking, actually, as you introducing your title, that's what I wanted to do before I became a journalist. I wanted to be an industrial psychologist.
That's fascinating.
So you could be talking to me.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to come to you on the couch to talk about work-life balance. All right. It's time for news headlines. Here we are with Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. At least 10 people have been killed in a gold mine collapse in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. M23 rebels have seized East Congo's two biggest cities since January in an escalation of a long-running conflict rooted in the spillover into Congo of Rwanda's 1994 genocide and the struggle for control of Congo's vast mineral resources. The Osindiso building fire trial is expected to continue today in the High Court in Johannesburg, South Africa. Sthembiso Mhlalose confers to causing fire in which 76 people were killed, majority of which were foreign nationals. And this week marks World Immunization Week, marked annually on the last week of April. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
All right, it's time for sports with Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Very good morning once again from the sports desk. So Uganda's half-marathon world record holder Jacob Kiplimo said he was well prepared and ready to do the best as he can when he makes his full marathon debut in the London Marathon this coming Sunday. So twice world cross-country champion Kiplimo, who shattered the half-marathon record by 48 seconds in Barcelona in February, will feature in a stellar field that includes Ethiopia's Olympic champion Timara Tola, as well as marathon great Eliud Kipchoge. Now, London Marathon director Hugh Brasher also described Kilimo's debut as the most fascinating ever. Kenya's defending men's champion Alexander Musito Munyao also will be running in London for the second time and expected an epic day with what he called a very strong field. Kipchoge, meanwhile, the former world record holder as well as 4 times London Marathon winner, is back in the capital for the first time since 2020, but the 40-year-old said his time was more about giving back. The 2016 as well as 2020 Olympic champion, who suffered back pains and also failed to finish at last year's Paris Olympic Games, said he was still hungry to inspire as well as motivate others. This year's London Marathon is expected to break the world record for the most participants, with more than 56,000 people set to compete. World under-20 100 metre as well as 200 metre champion Bayanda Walaza has expressed his disappointment over the absence of his idol Agane Simbeni at the national championships. The 19-year-old, who finished in second place in the final yesterday of the 100 metre at the Park MacArthur Stadium in Potchefstroom in South Africa's Northwest Province on Thursday, said it was heartbreaking not to compete against the South African record holder as well as multiple national champion. Simbeni opted to skip the event to focus on Saturday's Diamond League meeting in China. He had been looking forward to going head-to-head with one of his biggest inspirations.
We truly wanted to race against him, because even though we win, but it won't be the same as when he was here. You can be the SA champion, you're SA champion, but he's not there. We're not sure if you're faster than him. The goal is to pick the best, in the sports. That's how the sport works. You need to pick the best to be the best. So for him to be not here, also knows that everyone in here in South Africa wants to be the best. They know that they have to beat him. And he's not here. I'm heartbroken.
At the same time, Walaza last faced off with Agane Simbeni in KwaZulu-Natal just last year when he was just 18 years of age. He says the experience taught him a lot as he was eager to measure his progress against one of South Africa's best sprinters.
I think it was an emotional race for me as well, because being a junior competing against the seniors and everyone wants you to be challenging the best in the world as a young one. That made me see that in this world, there's no age, especially in the sports, Age is just a number, because people knew very well last year in Sunguzi that Agane is the best and I'm young. But people, they were like, you can do it, They gave me that motivation of no matter what age you are, you can still be competitive, And that's what built me, that's what made me strong, because I still want that race,
On to football news now. Al Ahly forward Njek Gradesa says he's counting on the energy of their influential supporters when they host Mamelodi Sundowns in the second leg of the CAF Champions League semi-finals. So the Egyptian side have been granted permission to have a full capacity crowd at the Cairo International Stadium against their South African counterparts in a fixture that will decide who gets a title shot. So tickets were sold out just over 2 hours of being made available, guaranteeing a rip-roaring atmosphere that Gradesa will experience for the first time since joining Al Ahly in January from the Hungarian Football League. The forward believes the Ultras, as Al Ahly's legion of supporters are known, will play a big part in how they approach the game tonight at the Cairo International Stadium.
The match was really hard. We had a lot of chances to score a goal, to get advantage for the next match, but we will do our best to win the match and go in the final. The supporters are very important. They support us everywhere. They even come to the South Africa. So we want you all to support us, and we will give our best to win the game.
Now, the lanky forward also sounded anxious when he was asked about his expectations as well as emotions in front of a large crowd.
I wait this moment until I came here. It's going to be tough for me, but I will do my best. Believe in the fans to support us and try my best to help the team to win the game.
All right, so that concludes your sports news this morning on Africa Rise and Shine. More sporting updates coming up in the next hour with the On The Move team. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Mosibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mokoenata@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African Perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Right, it's time to find out what's happening in business and economics. Good morning once again to Eva Chipa.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Ethiopia's inflation is expected to decline to 10% in the coming financial year, which was announced by the country's central bank chief, Mamo Meretu, yesterday, the lowest level in a decade thanks to the government's reform program. The East African nation struck a 4-year, $3.4 billion program deal with the International Monetary Fund last July and is undertaking far-reaching reforms, which include the flotation of its currency and getting its debt restructuring back on track. Inflation has been a major headache for Ethiopia, running at around 30% for 3 consecutive years, though in March it had already declined to 13%. The South African National Taxi Council, SANTACO, has defended government's decision to allocate over $21 million from the COVID-19 relief fund to the taxi industry. This after Build One South Africa questioned the once-off gratuity which was allocated in the 2025-26 budget. Responding to BOSA leader Musimaimani's parliamentary question, Transport Minister Barbara Creasy said the Cabinet had approved an ex gratia payment to assist taxi operators that the COVID-19 restrictions had in 2021. However, not all the beneficiaries have been able to access the funds. SANTACO National spokesperson Matikidi Rebecca Pala explains.
The taxi industry is currently experiencing a big problem of operating license backlogs. So some operators at the time when the funds were initially announced did not have their operating licenses, and as a result of that, because it's one of the biggest prerequisites for one to be able to apply, they couldn't do that. So it's one of the reasons why it's only being distributed now. But I mean, they've also been hardest hit, just as with everybody else. So we're not too certain why it's being questioned in that way, because it's not like it's just being given to just about everyone. It's being given to deserving operators.
The Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa says the celebrations around the reversal of the 0.5 basis points are premature. EFF spokesperson Sinawa Tambo says political point scoring has parties rushing to claim victory for the reversal without interrogating the Minister of Finance Ino Korongwane's announcement. In a statement, the minister says he will introduce a rates and monetary amounts bill together with the rates bill, where he will propose that the value-added tax remain at the current level of 15%. Tambo says there is no clarity on how the reversal will be implemented.
What the minister has released over midnight is a statement wherein he states his intention to propose an amendment bill in Parliament. So first and foremost, that statement doesn't say anywhere that immediately he has got the power to decree the reversal of the VAT hikes. That's the first thing that South Africans need to be aware of. We're not trying to burst anyone's bubble. We understand that there's a rush for everyone to claim a victory over the reversal of the VAT hike. There's no reversal of the VAT hike that is in effect right now.
Oil prices edged higher this morning but are on track for a weekly loss as a potential OPEC Plus output increase and a possible ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war may rise supply at the same time conflicting U.S. tariff signals limit the demand outlook. Brent crude futures gained 5 cents to $66.60, on track to fall by 2% for the week. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 6 cents to $62.85 a barrel, but that was set to decline by 2.9% for the week. Successful talks with Europe and the U.S. would likely result in the lifting of sanctions on Iranian oil exports, as Iran is the third biggest oil producer in OPEC, behind Saudi Arabia and Iraq. However, the demand outlook remains cloudy amid the trade war between China and the U.S., the world's two largest oil consumers. And lastly, the United States has criticized as harmful and dangerous the policies aimed at fading out fossil fuels. Addressing a London energy summit, U.S. energy official Tommy Joyce said Washington opposed policies which, in his words, endangered human lives. The BBC's Esme Stallard has more.
The war in Ukraine, President Trump's tariff policy, extreme weather and cyber warfare. These are just some of the risks that the International Energy Agency has warned are looming over the global energy system. The watchdog is co-hosting this meeting in London, where ministers are hoping to agree a way forward. In his opening address, Britain's Energy Secretary Ed Miliband said key to this was cooperation. But it seems fractures are already appearing. Tommy Joyce, a top US energy official, told reporters that America opposed efforts by some countries to regulate fossil fuels out of existence and called it harmful.
Taking a look at your financial indicators, one US dollar in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 610. In Botswana, it's 13 pula 58. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 59. It's 28 kwacha 26. To the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 reals 69. In Russia, 83 rubles 9. In India, 85 rupees 36. In China, 7 yuan 29. And in South Africa, it's 18 rand 70 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is standing at $3,348, platinum at $968 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is at $66.81 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2 711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business News, I'm Eva Chipa.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
7:45 Central African Time, and let's go to Tanzania now. And they've officially imposed a trade ban on food and agricultural products from Malawi, intensifying a diplomatic and economic standoff that began with trade restrictions on Tanzanian produce by the two nations. A similar ban has also been imposed on any agricultural produce from South Africa into the Tanzanian market. Tanzania's Minister of Agriculture, Hussein Bashe, announced the decision on Wednesday. This after both countries failed to lift their embargoes on Tanzanian goods, like a consignment of bananas that was recently blocked at the borders. Malawi's Trade Ministry spokesperson Patrick Botha says they have not received official communication on the ban. George Mango reports from Blantyre.
Malawi, a landlocked country, depends on Tanzanian and Mozambican ports for exports and imports. Tough times lie ahead if Malawi does not lift a ban on importation of food and agricultural products from Tanzania and other countries. Tanzania has come up with a complete ban on both the export and import of agricultural commodities between Tanzania and the two countries. Tanzania's Minister of Agriculture Hussein Bashe disclosed this on Wednesday after expiry of a deadline issued by Tanzania last week, in which Dodoma demanded that Malawi and South Africa lift their trade restrictions. He also criticized Malawi's handling of maize imports, noting the inconsistency in barring Tanzanian maize while simultaneously procuring the same grain through the World Food Programme, WFP. Tanzania has further said none of that maize will pass through Tanzanian territory, adding fertilizer exports to Malawi scheduled to commence on May 1st ahead of the country's planting season have also been suspended. Trade Ministry spokesperson Patrick Botha says Malawi did not comply on grounds that there was no official complaint from Tanzania on the trade-related standoff issues.
So as a ministry and as the government of Malawi, we haven't received any official communication from the government of the Republic of Tanzania. However, we are following the developments and we will make a comment at the appropriate time.
Malawi gazetted such a ban in March this year to save the much-needed forex and empower local farmers economically. But captains of industry and economists say Malawi should tread carefully on the matter. Gray Jean Kasunda, a consumer and media advocate, wonders why Malawi has not engaged their Tanzanian counterparts to solve the trade standoff.
Even though the Malawi government says they did not get official communication from Tanzania, Tanzania has an ambassador resident in Malawi. Why couldn't our government summon the Tanzanian ambassador just to get clarification on the matter? Our government ought to be proactive. The problem is that the traders are the ones that will suffer. But these people have no capacity to make decisions at government level. This is why we put people in power. So I advise our government to always be proactive, and they should work on modalities of engaging their Tanzanian counterparts before things get out of hand.
The ban action, according to Tanzania, goes even further, with Dodoma also halting the transit of any agricultural goods through its territory en route to Malawi. Despite this, Tanzania has acknowledged that diplomatic channels remain open, indicating that Minister for Foreign Affairs Mahmoud Tabit Kombo is reportedly engaging his counterparts in Lilongwe and Pretoria in dialogue aimed at resolving the impasse. George Mhango, Channel Africa News, Blantyre.
Right now, it's time for one of my favourite features of the week, and that's where we look back at what's been happening in the world of arts and culture. And we call it Arty Beat, and nobody does it like Nhlanhla Mahlangu.
Welcome to this week's African RT Beats, exclusive to Channel Africa, the African Perspective. I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu. In this week's segment, the South African Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2025 showcase kicks off, and thousands attend a charity concert supporting children affected by war in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The South African Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2025 showcase has kicked off at the Forum in Hyde Park in Johannesburg. Emerging and established designers will celebrate style and creativity under this year's theme, Quiet Luxury. Proceedings kicked off on Tuesday with an opening party hosted by Cruz Vodka. 15 designers including Gert Johan Kotsia, Thabo Makgetha, Tiger Blue, Rubicon, Naked Ape, BEM Collective, Beach Cult and Oyama Godinebe are showcasing. Hangwani Nkovela from Rubicon has more on what to expect for his show.
I am going to be showcasing ancestral wisdom in terms of how I grew up. the knowledge that I've acquired from grandparents, great-grandparents, and the environment that I grew up in terms of what made the Bavenda who they are. So I went and also blending in the women that have been so impactful with Rubicon, celebrating them through the way I've curated the whole design process. There have been so many women that have been there from day one, and they're still there standing and believing in the brand. And for me, it's just a tribute to all the women that are still, supporting Rubicon. We celebrate them because they've made us who we are. And also, by them supporting us, it's an encouragement as well. And also supporting families, creating jobs. And so I've fused in my history that has been passed on from generation to generation, from what makes the Lavender people the way, their culture, and bringing in the past, present, and the future in terms of the silhouettes as well.
You are one of the few designers that always gets an opportunity to showcase your work at Fashion Week. What are some of the opportunities that are presented to designers at an event like Fashion Week?
I always say that if you're going to be showcasing at the South African Fashion Week or any other Fashion Week, you have to be commercially ready. It's not just about showcasing that you are creative and people must admire but not purchase. So understanding the whole value chain is very important. Yes, it's a marketing platform, but what you showcase must make sense to the consumer at the end of the day. And there must be return on investment, because it's quite expensive to showcase, to put a collection together, because it's not just obviously paying for that platform to showcase. There is also obviously building a collection, which is very, very costly. And sometimes you get it right. I mean, there are pieces that I will put in, that I will create, and I'll say, no, they're not going to go in. It's not working. It's not speaking. It's not part of this collection. And it becomes a very expensive process. So you have to be really, really business ready for it. And the opportunities, obviously, that you will get from it is the market access that will love what you're making, and they will like to purchase your designs. That's what makes it very important. And also just buyers. Post-COVID, most boutiques that we used to supply have closed down. They're not existing. So, it's still a journey post-COVID that, we're trying to get into as many boutiques. But, in terms of where we are at, I always say use what you have and make sure that it's able to fulfill that mission. So for Rubicon, it has been niche so far, but I would love for it to go much more accessible, to the market. But the niche that we have, we make sure that we service it well and give it that extra care. Rather, you over-deliver than not deliver at all.
This past Tuesday saw thousands of people gather at the Accor Arena in Paris for Solidarité Congo, a charity concert supporting children affected by war in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The concert was almost abandoned. Initially set for the 7th of April, the show was postponed after controversy arose. The date coincided with the start of events to mark the Rwanda genocide, which was deemed too sensitive given the tensions between Kigali and Kinshasa. The date coincided with the Tutsi Genocide Commemoration Day, provoking the indignation of several Rwandan associations. Under pressure and faced with a possible ban by the Paris police prefecture, the organizers finally gave in. Big names from Kinshasa, a gospel singer Moise Mbiye and Rumba star Fali Ipupa set the arena alight as survivors of armed groups shared moving testimonies. That's it from this week's African RTBs. Until next Friday for Channel Africa, I am Kantla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
Zilipendwa na I am Henry Shekif.
Baiter, mambo vipi?
Poa.
Mwaka 2025 mpaka hivi sasa ukoje kwa upande wako mzee baba?
Kabisa, kwa sababu tumejiandaa vizuri. Kama mwaka jana tumefunga vizuri na Septemba, mwaka huu tumefungua vizuri na
hatari sana. Mzee umejipanga, utaki kutupumzisha?
Maana mwanzo alikuwa analalamika sana, you spend long time without releasing songs, blah blah. Now I need to
back to back. Platform, mambo vipi?
Mambo poa kabisa, wanasemaje uko SA?
Yani huku kuna shangwe, yani la kufa mtu, sikwambie mtu babu.
Hii ni mara yangu ya kwanza pia kusikika kwa pande hizo za South Africa.
Karibu sana, unajisikiaje?
Kwa hiyo na furaha kubwa sana kwa sababu ni mara yangu ya kwanza, na I hope watu watakuwa wananisikiliza, watu wengi pia. Ili uweze kuvuka nje, watu waweze kukufahamu, tuseme West hivi na nchi tofauti, ni lazima pia uanze kufanya vizuri hapa nyumbani, then uvuke East Africa. After East Africa,
Zilipendwa hapa kwenye Channel Africa, taswira ya Afrika.
Right, it is a little bit before the top of the hour, which means it's time to find out from Palesa, and I love the hair, by the way.
And then I just hear something new now, that you, Miss Palesa Tau, were on the reality show Survivor.
Look, twice, by the way.
Yes.
I know you've spoken about it already before, but I'm hearing it for the first time, so I want to know, how far did you go?
My first season, I made it to merge. And my second season, just before merge, I was booted out.
Girl, you're doing the things. Eh? You never know, the people that you work with are on another level. Wow, I'm impressed.
All right, today on The Move, happy Friday, by the way, guys.
Friday.
I'm so glad that the sun decided to grace our presence here in Johannesburg today. But South Africa actually boasts the largest and most successful animation sector on the African continent, and is known for its diverse range of styles and mediums. So we'll be talking about the animation sector in South Africa and the continent at large. We're chatting to the managing director of Black Native Media in the first hour of the show. And then we speak about a groundbreaking cultural initiative that brings together 20 emerging established artists from South Africa and Tanzania to exchange artworks, fostering cross-border dialogue and market research. We'll be speaking to the project, the arts company Soweto, that's what it's called, and Kokoten, and these are contributions made by co-founder Molefe Twala, who'll be chatting to us in the second hour. And of course, you know, we profile a musician in our final hour every Friday, and today we'll be speaking to someone called Mtwana, who'll be chatting to us, releasing a brand new single today.
And what is this child singing about?
Well, you have to find out. He's a pop and R&B singer and songwriter.
Oh my goodness.
A what?
Pop and R&B.
Pop and
and
pop.
R&B.
Oh, pop and
Yeah,
R&B.
no, some of
Wow,
us were a little bit older, so
I didn't even know you can mix the two. Pop and
Exactly.
I thought they're so distinctly different. But anyway,
that's where we
great.
leave it. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. Have an awesome weekend. I'm Peter Ndoro.
I'm Asanda Beda from Rise and Shine. It's bye for now, and it's news time.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And looking at your top stories this hour, Rwandan man arrested in the U.S. and U.S. President Donald Trump insists of putting pressure on Russia and Ukraine. Your latest news, greetings to our listeners. A man originally from Rwanda has been arrested in the U.S. Faustin Ntabukunzi was allegedly involved in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. He is accused of concealing his